بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome and jazakumullah khair for joining us today for our topic, Culture versus Islam, with our brother Abdullah Al-Andalusi, who's visiting us from the UK on a Canadian tour. Brother Abdullah is a researcher, lecturer, debater, specifically with the Muslim Debate Initiative. He's been on television, he's been on Al Jazeera and various platforms. And today, alhamdulillah, he's here with us today, and we're going to learn and engage. So inshallah, we're going to start with a Quran recitation, and then I'm just going to hand over to Brother Abdullah. And this event is brought to you by the I3 Institute. It's sponsored by them, and we brought it to Masjid al-Nur, working and collaborating with both the Islamic Society of St. Catherine's, Masjid al-Nur, and Brock University Muslim Student Association. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. So without any further ado, the mic and the floor goes to Brother Abdullah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu as-salam Nabi Kareem Muhammad wa alihi tayyibin wa sahbihi salihin. I greet you all the Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to thank the masjid, the I3, and all the brothers and sisters here that have attended for making this event happen, go ahead, despite the heavy snowfalls I've heard have obstructed traffic. So for those of you who managed to literally plow your way through, I do appreciate you coming, and inshallah, hopefully this can be a beneficial event that was worth digging your way out of your houses to come here in the first place. So today's kind of discussion, it was meant to be about culture versus Islam, and generally I got the impression when this kind of title was suggested to me that it was about the cultures that Muslims have in the Muslim world and how it might contradict the Deen of Islam and the problems that arise and how some people pick culture over Islam. And at the same time, I think I wanted to kind of add to this an element of the perspective of Western culture and how that also has an effect, and how some people choose Western culture over Islam. And this is kind of linked to a discussion I want to now link to a discussion I had in the car coming over here, and the brother who brought me here asked me a lot of questions about this matter. And well, I guess the first misconception I think we need to deal with is the idea that culture in Islam, or culture would always be something distinct from Islam or from religion, full stop. Basically, our ancestors, and even if all the civilizations, the Greeks, Egyptians, the people of the Indus Valley, the Indians, if you want to call them that, the Chinese, and so on and so forth, they did not have an idea that culture and religion are different. No one had an idea that culture and religion are different. In fact, if you see that from the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you see in the Quran, there is only one word used to describe what we call today religion and what we also call culture. And there's one word that actually means both of those things, or it encompasses all of those things, which is deen, meaning a belief and a way of life together, not separate things. They're not meant to be separate things. Now that being said, there are aspects of people's deen which we wouldn't say is culture in the sense we mean it in the English terms. So, for example, wearing a jalabiya or an imama, a turban, or wearing a shalwar kameez, or wearing, I'm not sure the actual name for it, those kind of flowing robes or clothes that you get in Nigeria, which are quite colourful, basically. We wouldn't say that this is part of someone's deen. These clothes are connected to deen, per se. They're not. They're just what we'd say the habits and customs of people in different parts of the world in those areas, like language and like the type of cooking they have. But what does concern deen is things they do linked to their worldview and their beliefs about life, the beliefs of their peoples connected to their religion, all in one. And the idea that culture and religion are separate is a very modern idea, certainly after the West kind of invented secularism, to secularize how people live and what they believe, create them into two separate things. To the point now that we view them as two separate things. And then it becomes more difficult for us to tackle this, because it's easier for a Muslim to say, well, my religion is Islam, but my culture is not necessarily entirely Islamic. My culture does not necessarily, or it's not, my culture has some things which are contradictory to Islam, right? But that's just, I can live with that. Or it's not, I'm not happy with it, but I can live with it. But it sounds much more egregious if you say your deen isn't Islam or it's not Islamic. That sounds a bit more shocking, because a deen would encompass what practices they do as well, and that would be part of it. We wouldn't make a separation. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "You're upon the deen of your companion," a person is upon the deen of his companion. It's not necessarily meaning that you have to believe what that person believes, but what they do and what they practice and their pastimes and their pursuits, eventually, if you hang around them long enough, you'll feel inclined to do the same. A person's upon the deen of their companion. But because in English we have this separation of these two terms, religion just being a belief and culture being a practice, we can live with this kind of almost kind of multiple personality disorder that I think afflicts the Muslim minds to this day and age. Believe one thing, practice something else. And it's not just Muslims that's afflicted, it's anyone in the modern world that's afflicted, because they wanted to separate religion from your life's affairs. And they did it. They started with Christianity, and eventually they kind of exported that to the world via colonialism. But because we have taken in that idea, we view religion and culture to be two different things. Whereas in Islam, there is just your deen. What is your deen upon? What is the basis for your deen? And that's it. There's no other. You can't have two deens at the same time. I think as the Arab proverb goes, a horse cannot have two saddles. Right? So, or the was it the New Testament proverb? Was it a servant can't have two masters? Right, but it's the same. It's saying this exact same thing. So, this is where you get culture versus Islam, because you have detached practices from religion, and in a way, culture versus Islam. And I know we're just talking about common parlance now, how we use it, but in essence, to depict culture versus Islam as has always been portrayed to us, actually secularizes Islam, because it says that there can be a difference between the two, that they are two distinct things. You can't say deen versus deen unless you're referring to one deen versus a different deen. Then you can have a deen versus not a deen. And what makes Islam different from a generic deen? So the pagan Arabs were upon a deen. They were told that they were upon the deen. That's what the Quran was addressing them. Lakum deenukum waliya deen, right? To you, your way of life. To me, my way of life. But Islam is a deen min mabda, which is a way of life based on principles. Whereas other people's, maybe other civilizations or like tribes in the Amazon or what have you, their deen is just based on a collection of things they've inherited from their parents, from their ancestors. But Islam is a deen, not just a set of practices that you take from your ancestors. It's not. Islam is a set of ideas, principles, guidance, rules, commands, prohibitions, advice. Deen nasiha, deen is advice. It's a whole bunch of these things together. It's not a set of traditions you take from your parents. And that's another point to make. And you think, okay, but isn't that like a very obscure point to make? Why do you illustrate that? And that's because Muslims should not be conservative. You should not be a conservative Muslim. You shouldn't be a liberal Muslim either. You say, but isn't there only two, right? Isn't there like either conservative or you're liberal? No, because that scale, the left wing and the right wing scale, was a scale invented in the West to measure where you fit along their madahib, the madahib of Western ideology, which is secular liberalism. So are you someone who believes that you should advance secular liberalism or liberalism in its and full equality in its purest form? Or do you believe that we should retain institutions and hierarchies that guarantee individual liberty? That's the difference between a conservative and a liberal. But when you view yourself as a conservative, or when people call you a conservative and you accept it, you're thinking, well, those conservative Christians, they have certain beliefs that seem similar in terms of their respect for their Bible, seems similar to our respect for the Quran. So are we not like conservative like them? I say no. Because a conservative is trying to preserve the past. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ revealed, showed and related the revelation of Islam that he received from Angel Jibreel, was he trying to preserve the past? The past, or how the pagan Arabs were, what he found them upon? Was he trying to preserve that? Was he trying to conserve the culture of the pagan Arabs as it was? No. He came to transform their situation, to conform to the guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, and to the fitrah, and get back to the fitrah of man, our nature, and put human beings back upon the fitrah. That's what it was trying to do. Islam is a transformative. It is transformative. It's not something that conserves the past. Because every situation we encounter in the world today, or as the Muslims encountered 1400 years ago, and every time since, Islam has always been acting to transform, to change, to improve, to enhance, and get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to reach ihsan, the perfection. Of course, we can never reach 100% ihsan, but the whole point of a Muslim is to strive ihsan in themselves and ihsan in their society as much as possible. I mean, obviously, you can never achieve it, but it's meant to be an ideal to always seek. Perfection. Be the perfect worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The perfect abd of Allah. That's what you're trying to seek. And to create a society which has the best justice, the best mercy, as well, compassion for everyone, for those who are weak, those who are needy, those who need help, and justice for everybody, and guidance, and creating the best example, the best ayat, signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through your adab, through your akhlaq, and through the society, how they practice, and what they do, their practices, as well as the laws and guidance and so on. This is for mankind. This is the world project of Islam, is to transform the world and be an example to mankind of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And La ilaha illallah isn't only just who you're praying to, who you're physically doing the ritual ibadah prayers, but La ilaha illallah means that there is no other reference point in your life. No nationalism, no patriotism, no human individual cult leader, no matter how charismatic or orange-skinned they are, that you should make the basis of your right and wrong other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing should be the basis for right or wrong for you in your life except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And some people, they have other gods that don't look like stone statues. They have other idols that don't look like stone statues. They might be flags. They might be pop stars and celebrities, or charismatic politicians. They might be their mother and father. They might worship their mother and father, so to speak, so much that they will obey them no matter what they tell them to do, no matter how bad it is what they say. Or it might be society they've made their god. They're so worried about what society will think of them, they will do really bad deeds to fit in and be respected by society. They've made society their ilah. And of course, the most pernicious idol of them all, people's hawa, their desires, and they've made their desires their Rabb. So there's many idols, there's many false or taghut ilah out there. And la ilaha illallah is meant to be, for the Muslim, a rejection of all this taghut, and establishing that our basis for right and wrong and for our very meaning and purpose is only the creator of the universe. Even if everyone hates us for it, even if it goes against the customs that we're taught in our society, or even if our parents don't like it and tell us not to stop doing it, we only have one true ilah, and that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is basically how the basis of the aqidah upon which a Muslim should base themselves to create change in their society. I heard a great kind of saying when people said, a discussion as to people saying we need to reform Islam because it has to fit into the modern world. And I heard a great saying. I didn't invent it, so I can't claim it's mine, but it's good enough, so I want to reiterate it, which is Islam cannot be reformed. Islam is the Reformation. Islam is the Reformation. It was here to reform. It was certainly here to reform Christianity, which had veered away from the original teachings of Jesus, putting it back on the original Tawheed that the Jews were following at the time of Jesus. And then later on, the Greeks followed it, and they changed it to adapt to their religion. They adapted their religion to fit their times. And of course, do you know why? Do you know why Christianity became divergent? Do you know why Christians can eat non-halal meat that was killed with the blood not being taken out, despite the fact that in the New Testament, and not the Old Testament, not the Tanakh, the book of the Jews, no. In the New Testament, it says that Christians are not allowed to eat meat that has blood in it. Right, it's in the New Testament Bible. Oh, and meat sacrificed to idols as well, but they don't do that anymore. But they certainly don't take the blood out of the meat before they eat it. It was viewed in the law of Moses as called carrion meat. You know, if you see like a dead animal off the street and it died of natural causes or disease or illness, just like taking it and cooking it and eating it, that's how it was viewed if you don't take the blood out. And as Muslims, we follow the teachings. We're following the teachings that is even in the New Testament. But do you know why Christians don't practice that, and why they don't follow the laws, and obviously they don't circumcise themselves, the males amongst them? And well, the reason being is because there was an individual that came after Jesus. He was called Saul of Tarsus, or as they called him, Saint Paul, and he wanted to sell Christianity to the Romans. But it's tough to get the Romans to stop eating pork, which is also still prohibited, by the way. So, stop eating pork, to eat meat that was sacrificed, stop eating meat that's sacrificed to idols, because that's how all the meat was kind of made generally. So if you want to convert someone, it's going to be very hard for them to eat meat afterwards. And all the other practices that Jews practice, it was very hard to get a non-Jew to agree to those practices, which are much more restrictive compared to what they're used to. It's very tough. So instead, he argued that it's not important what you practice, but faith in the heart that matters. It's the faith. Does that sound familiar? I've heard Muslims saying some of that. I've heard Muslims saying the same thing, saying that, brother, it's what's in the heart that's important. And it's like, well, considering that your actions come from your heart, then you got, and then your heart is not having a good account at the moment, brother. That's because where does your actions come from? It comes from you, comes from what's inside you. So if your actions are ugly, then that means what's inside you is not any better. It doesn't come from anywhere else. It's not like you're a puppet and your hands are being moved against your heart's will. It's your heart that's willing it, isn't it? It's your heart that's doing it. So, but St. Paul said that faith is purely about belief in the heart, and not about physical actions, not about righteous actions physically, even though that contradicts the New Testament. And that became the teachings. And you think, oh, well, how could he contradict the New Testament? Or why isn't St. Paul mentioned in the New Testament? And say, well, he's not someone who is giving the hadith of Jesus, alayhi salam. St. Paul being added to the New Testament is like the equivalent. It's like the equivalent of, let's say, someone adding Imam Shafi's Risala and adding it to the Quran and saying this is the Quran, this is the entire Quran, including Imam Shafi, who came much later and just giving his opinions, and you say those opinions are part of the Quran now as well. That's why St. Paul never met Jesus. His stuff is included in the Bible, and that became part of the teachings of the Bible, even though it's not the teaching of Jesus. But he was trying to fit Christianity into the culture or the practice, the deen of the Romans and the Greeks. That's why he made those changes. That's why he made those changes. And you're going to find a lot of pressure living in the West, not being able to change the culture of the West. And so you're going to have it being a demand or call for your beliefs or your deen to change to fit into the West. And you might say, well, how do we get around that, right? How do we get around this? Because the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if a person is upon the deen of their companions, so we're in the West and we can't, we can't affect any kind of, we can't do radical change in the West to fit Islam. So are we going to be doomed to changing our deen? If we can't change the West, then the West is going to change us. Is that the only dichotomy? And I say not necessarily at all, because the way you can protect yourself from being pressured to change your deen is to be constantly giving da'wah or calling people around you to Islam. Because if you're spending so much time calling people to Islam and being an example to them of an alternative way of life, there'll be no time for anyone to call you away, so to speak. You won't have enough time to be called away, to be pressured. And it's tough. It's very tough. It's easier said than done, by the way. It's much easier said than done. I don't pretend that I can just say this and then that's straightforward, because you're going to be facing pressures from your boss at work who does not understand that you have to pray 5 times a day. Doesn't understand you have to take time out. But I'll give an example, and this is the British example. And as I said, I don't want to kind of to give people detailed practical advice when I don't know their reality fully, and I don't know fully the reality of Muslims in Canada. And so it would be a bit presumptuous of me to start giving you prescriptive advice. So instead of giving you prescriptive advice, I'll tell you something that worked in England. So if Muslims first came to England and we said, there's no halal meat here, so let's just eat the meat that's available. Now, I say this, I want to give a caveat before I continue and say, I know there's 2 opinions in Islam. Again, I was talking to a brother about this earlier on today as well. I know there's 2 opinions in Islam whereby people say you can eat the meat of the Ahl Kitab, and they include in that Christians. Whereas the other opinion is not only Jews, because Jews practice the same kind of zabiha approach to their meat. There's 2 opinions. I'm not here to argue which opinion is stronger or what have you. If you adopt the opinion that it includes Christians and that the West or England and Canada and America are still Christian countries and Christian societies, then Bismillah, if that's what you think is strong, that's your opinion. But if you adopt the opinion that you can only eat halal meat, and even then, even if you adopt the opinion that you can eat the meat of the Christians and Jews, surely it would always be better if you could always eat halal meat done by Muslims. Surely you would even that people who follow that would admit that it's always better to eat halal meat. If people came to England and they said, you know what, there's no halal meat here, let's just eat the meat that's available. Let's just eat the meat that's available. Then we would never encounter the situation we have today, where now halal is so ubiquitous in London and many parts of UK that even restaurants which are non-Muslim sell halal meat because they see economic gain in it. They want to get Muslim customers. So if Muslims came in and said, you know what, let's just adapt to the society that we're in and just compromise Islam, we would never have got the situation whereby now the circumstance in society is actually now made more easier for Muslims because they asked for that. Many workplaces in the UK now have multi-faith areas and prayer facilities, and I'm also assuming in Canada too. Huh? Makeshift, but they exist nonetheless. Imagine if Muslims never asked for this, because, as I said, Christians, Hindus, well, with the exception of Jews, which are like Muslims, they do pray at intervals in the day. But let's say Hindus and Christians and Buddhists, they don't need to take time off work during a working day to pray in very specific areas, per se, right? They're happy to kind of adapt their cycle because they don't have to pray at very specific intervals in a day. But because Muslims came and started to pray in large numbers and then asked their bosses about it, and then when bosses were being unreasonable, so much so that they were saying, look, you give cigarette breaks to people for 5 minutes and you can't give us 5 minutes for salah, right? Then because of this, it became into kind of understanding in law that it would be discrimination if people were denied the right to just take a little bit of time off to pray. And it can be accepted by Muslims that, you know what, if we're not paid for that time, it's not a problem. We'll come out of our pockets, it's not a problem. But generally speaking, because cigarette breaks are allowed or lunch breaks are allowed, Muslims can take it from their lunch break and have a shorter lunch break. For example, many Muslims on Fridays forgo the normal lunch break, which they can leave the office anyway. You can leave an office during your lunch break, and they use that time to go to the mosque and come back. Or they make an arrangement with their boss saying, I'll work extra time here or there or what have you, but I want to have my time for Jummah. Because Muslims came in and asked for this, and asked for it without impinging anyone else's rights, doesn't impinge anybody else's rights, now we have a circumstance where we have that. Because we didn't compromise. But if people said, brother, it's really difficult to, do your salah and go to Jummah, so maybe, maybe Allah will understand, you don't have to do it. Firstly, they're inventing a lie against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because if it's not in the Sharia, then who are they to say they know what Allah knows or Allah thinks if it hasn't been given in His word? What's the point of revelation then if you can just imagine what Allah thinks? And isn't the Quran replete with verses that condemn people who invent lies against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without knowledge? It's about people who make things up, basically, because they're trying to follow their desires about something. So that's kind of, I would say, Western context, which is we're not imposing our religion on people, as the Islamophobes like to say. We're not demanding that people pray or stop eating pork or stop drinking alcohol. We're just merely saying that we should have the right to live by our values, and our values do not include forcing people to live by them, but it should include us being able to practice them. And because you have the ability to speak and share your beliefs and ideas, you should always be an example for the haqq. And I give you one case from something that happened to me on Sunday, not yesterday, the Sunday beforehand. So I was on the BBC in some debate program with a less than moderate moderator or host, a less than hospitable host, which is the case. So I was brought in to represent what they would call the conservative Muslim opinion, or whatever they label it as. And they give more time to narratives they want to support, which is the kind of liberal view, the secular view. And it was discussing on gambling, and they had this Muslim sister on there who was an aspiring MP, Minister of Parliament. She's inspiring, for those of you American, let's say congressperson. Right? I was going to say congressman, but I'll say no. I'll say because Trudeau might come in and tell me off. So I say congressperson. And And she was on the same program. She's Muslim. And we were talking about gambling. And the title of the program was, or the question was, should gambling basically be socially unacceptable? So should we make it like not acceptable or a thing that should be looked down upon? And there were debate really was between two groups. One, everyone believes gambling should be permitted, but one group wanted it to be regulated more to stop it being to exploiting the youth, and others believe that it shouldn't be regulated because we have enough laws already, and people should just be educated more about the harms of gambling if you have any problems with its effects. The whole education solves everything approach. And into this milieu, I basically said, look guys, there are harms involved in gambling which you just can't extricate from it. It's part and parcel of what gambling does. And likewise, you can't say the problems are corporations that exploit people using incentives to gamble, and yet not also condemn people who are the low level, what we call local bookies, as we say, the local horse race kind of people, organizations that hold horse races and take bets. Because the corporations always say that, why are you restricting us for a principle that's allowed for other people? It's not fair. So I told them, look, either you allow it completely or you prohibit it, but no halfway measures, which are arbitrary. You say, oh, well, let's regulate it here and regulate there. So look, either you think it's halal or haram from your ideology. But then I said that from the Islamic basis, from the Abrahamic basis, because it's not just Islam also that has a dim view of gambling, I said that we prohibit it, and it'd be easy for you if you prohibited it too. And the sister who came into kind of inspiring MP, she was arguing, no, we need regulation and regulation of gambling, so that just so that corporations don't exploit the youth. But of course, no one here is saying we should ban it. And the host said, well, Abdullah's saying you should ban it. and then afterwards, after the program, she comes up to me and says, look, I'm not saying that it's halal or anything to gamble. I'm just, just in the context where we are, like you can't just tell people that they should ban it because they don't want to ban it, right? And there was even there was a couple who had lost their son had committed suicide because of his gambling habit, and became so depressed on it, and even they didn't argue for it to be banned. And so my kind of point to her was, well, look, are we coming on this program to call people to the truth, or are we not? Because if we're not, then there's no point coming on the program. If you're not here to talk about the truth and be a witness to mankind, this is what does it mean to be witness to mankind of the truth, which the Quran and Sunnah tells us to do, is that you tell mankind, this is the truth, this is the falsehood. You make them realize, you make them at least know it, at least you've conveyed it, so that on the Day of Judgment, you won't be joining them. And also on the Day of Judgment, when they say, oh, we were ignorant about this, then you can be called up and asked, and said, did you not hear about the truth from these people? Well, then you have no excuse. And also if you look at the Quran, when it talks about the Sabbath breakers, the people that broke the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Yawm al-Sabt, right, the Sabbath. The people that admonished them, the people that said what you're doing is wrong, their primary reason, the Quran explains their first reason, the first primary reason they said as to why they're going to correct their fellows. It wasn't in the hope that their companions would come back from that, would stop breaking the law of Islam, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that was given to their people. No. It was that they were worried that they would be punished along with them. And in order to do a kind of, bara', a separation, they say that we're going to tell you what the truth is, and we're going to say it is wrong, and therefore, in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have made disassociation. And they said they did bara' with their tongues. It didn't say that they live apart from them or move away from them, because they were all in the same city. They didn't leave. They just did disassociation with their tongues. So now I've said it's wrong. Now, on the Day of Judgment, we are now two people. We'll be two different people. But then after they said that, as the Quran reports, the Quran reports that their secondary concern was, and maybe they do hope that they would turn away from their bad deeds as well. But their primary concern was that they don't be labeled as part of that group on the Day of Judgment or when Allah's punishment comes. So either you are calling people to the truth and being witnesses to the truth, or you're being called to it. You're being called away to falsehood. It's your choice where you want to be in that. What about the culture in Muslim world? Or rather, what about the deen in the Muslim world? What you'll see in the Muslim world is, and I've tried to explain it many times, is one of the things I detest is people say we need a reformation of Islam because look at what's happening in the Muslim world. Look at how the poor are being treated, women are being treated, how just the rulers treat their people. So because Muslims are doing this, it must be a problem with Islam, and therefore we need a reformation of Islam. And that always really irritates me, because I tell them I wish the people and the rulers and everyone in between were following Islam, because they wouldn't be doing this. And I give you some examples. I'll give you some examples of two laws that we regularly blame for. So one of these laws is the law of, so let's take in Pakistan, they always condemn Pakistan for the blasphemy law. And they say, look at the blasphemy law in Pakistan, look how it's applied. This is something which is causing so much people to suffer because people are being accused of blasphemy. And that's not, this is against free speech, or this is against, you're seeing even Muslims being arrested for this, but usually they only care when it's non-Muslims being arrested for it. And they say this is a problem with Islam, and this is a problem with Pakistan's understanding of Islam, or at least that Islam should be reformed and changed so that it doesn't include that. And I say, look, in the Sharia, there is a prohibition against insulting the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and insulting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, because insult should not come under free speech. And why is that? Well, for the very simple reason that even in the West, they don't believe that insult should come under free speech. Even in the United States of America, with their First Amendment rights, they have many prohibitions about what you can and can't say. But they say, all right, well, we all agree that you can't, let's say, ask someone to commit murder. We all agree on that you can't do that. It's illegal. It should be illegal. But even in the United States, there's something, we're talking about federal laws, not the individual state laws, which might have even more restrictions locally. But in federal law, for example, you can't say something what's called fighting words, whereby if you were to insult someone's mother, let's say, to the point that it would be reasonably expected that that person would retaliate with violence. So if you were to say an insult that would usually merit a violent response, that very insult is against the law of the federal law of the United States of America. You can't say. I mean, it's not a federal crime exactly, but it's against the law that is generally consistent in all the state legislatures, for example, because they know that would lead to violence. And of course, you can't slander and libel people because you damage their reputations. They can sue you for it. And in the UK, we have even more laws than the United States. So you can't, for example, use racial insults as well. You can't do that. It's illegal. I'm assuming Canada has something similar because Canada and Australia usually kind of follow along with the UK's lead in some of these laws. So I'm assuming you can't say that here either. And no one says, oh, but free speech. And I'm like, well, no, because why do you have to insult people? What is the reason for it? And of course, I was once at, I was speaking at university in Regina, and there was this Canadian guy turned up who thought he could just basically show how Sharia is barbaric or backward, and he said that we have free speech in this country and we should be allowed to insult religions. And I said, well, can you insult people? Well, race and ethnicity and sexual preference, because like, well, no, that's different. I say, no, that's just your taboos. We have other taboos. But even then, I question the principle, which is, tell me what's the justification for insult? What is the justification for insult? Tell me why it should be a right. Free speech, well, it's part of free speech. You say, yeah, but why was free speech invented, or let's say championed in the Enlightenment in Europe? Why was it important? What's the purpose of free speech? And that kind of like shocked me, because you never thought about this. Most people follow liberalism like a dogma and doctrine they haven't questioned, so they don't know. They just assume that you will agree with the premise. And like, but if you challenge it, they look at you blankly like, well, because that's what we do. Right? No, why? And if you look at the Enlightenment thinkers, John Locke and all the individuals, which I won't go into, their justification for it, they said it was for the pursuit of truth, so that people can have a debate, they can talk to each other, you can express your honest opinions about subject matters, and through this discussion, hopefully the truth becomes manifest. That's the purpose of it. But gratuitous insult doesn't serve the purpose of truth. What I mean by that is not taking offense, but rather deliberately trying to insult, give offense. You're deliberately trying to insult, and our legal systems understand the difference between offense and intent to insult, by the way. They do have that in English law, even actually causing offense in public, as it comes under public harassment laws, by the way. So it's in the English legal system. I'm not sure about the Canadian one. Anyway, so back to Pakistan. So basically in Pakistan, they have the blasphemy law, and it's always attacked, saying, oh, look, this is a problem, we need to get rid of it, we need to repeal it. And no one ever asks, oh, where did it come from? Where did the Pakistan blasphemy law come from? No one ever asks these really basic questions. And the really basic answer to that is the British wrote it. And the British didn't just write it down for Pakistan. The British wrote it down for the colonial Indian government. And then when India and Pakistan were created, they both adopted the penal system used. So India also has a blasphemy law, by the way. The same one, same wording, exact same words, because it was taken from the same model. And you know what's even more ironic was the first people who were ever prosecuted under British administration of India for blasphemy were two Muslims. And they were prosecuted because they had killed a cow, and the Hindus claimed that this was insulting their gods, because the god is the cow is a sacred object for them, and that's not allowed in the blasphemy law. You're not allowed to insult sacred objects in the blasphemy law formulated by the British in colonial India, and also copy and pasted by Pakistan and copy pasted by India after independence. Of course, they appealed it. These two Muslims appealed it, saying that a cow isn't an object; it's a living thing, and they got off on that technicality. But the first people ever prosecuted by the blasphemy law, which the Pakistan uses as a template, is basically were Muslims, which is the irony of the case. And what you see how it's used in Pakistan, this blasphemy law, is it's used against Muslims by other Muslims. So basically, if you're someone who doesn't believe that, if you think that celebrating the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is a bid'ah, one guy believed it was the case. He saw a poster on the wall saying, that, according to the celebration of the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, so he thought this was wrong, and he tore down the poster. Now, whether you believe in that opinion or not, it's not the case here. The point is that he was prosecuted for insulting the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ by taking down a poster calling to celebrate his birthday. The guy loves the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He doesn't hate him, but it was applied upon him by people who didn't have that opinion and were trying to kind of like use it as a weapon against their brothers. But in the Sharia, according to the Sharia understanding of all the madahib about what constitutes an insult to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that man would never be prosecuted in the first place, because it requires a very clear intent. The person should intend to insult the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And the guy clearly wasn't intending to. So Sharia would have not seen that prosecution go forth. But according to the laws in that law in Pakistan, they was prosecuted for it. Let's take another law. So in Lebanon, Tunisia and Jordan, although they've now recently been repealed, but it was discussed in the news, and other countries still hold this law. that if a man rapes a woman or kidnaps her and ends up marries her before the police catch him, then he can't be prosecuted. He can't be now. This in those three countries, it was recently repealed, that law, but it still exists in other countries. And people say, look at the Muslims, look how backward they are, look at their Sharia. That law doesn't come from the Sharia. You know what the Sharia would say about anyone who commits the action would be that the man, if they kidnapped a woman or raped her or raped her, that person, depending on the circumstances, could face any punishment from 100 lashes to execution for hiraba, like let's say brigandage and highway robbery, because it's viewed as a type of it was a crime of violation using violence. So a violation of a person's body using violence, and violation of a person's property as well is also considered to be hiraba. That's what the Sharia would say. But that law existed, and people blame Muslims for it, and they say, look at these laws that come from Islam. It doesn't come from Islam. Does anyone know where that law came from? I'm going to open up the audience. Does anyone know where that law comes from? Tunisia, Jordan, and Lebanon.
France.
Oh, you guys have been doing your homework. That's mashallah. Yes, it does. Do you know which part of when that was given to the Muslims, or when they adopted that law?
Most likely in the 1800s.
Napoleon?
After the Sykes-Picot.
No, not the Sykes-Picot Agreement. That came much later, and that wasn't concerning law systems, although they were probably connected to it. But no, it was the adoption of the Napoleonic Penal Code of 1810, where that's contained in it. And actually, France only repealed that penal code in, I believe, the 90s. I have to double check that, but they repealed that. It was a legacy in their law system until the 90s, actually, which is quite ironic. And Muslims weren't the only ones who adopted that code. Many non-Muslim, like Romania and the South American countries, adopted the Napoleonic legal code as a great model. And when it comes, so in countries that France occupied, they implemented that as a law code, and Muslims adopted it. And they said they adopted it because, as it was justified to the masses, Islam needs to adapt to the modern world. Therefore, they argued that you should adopt Napoleonic legal codes that basically allow rapists to get away with rape. That's what happens when you argue Islam should adapt to the modern world, because that's exactly what happened. And yet people say, we need to have the enlightened law codes from the West because this will improve our circumstances, and the Sharia is too barbaric; it needs to be updated. Where in the Sharia, the rapists will never be able to get away. And but funnily enough, though, how that law system came into countries that weren't occupied by France was because certain Ottoman Turks who were liberal were so enamored with the West, they pushed for the Tanzimat reforms, and they tried to push those laws based on the French constitution in. Sultan Abdulhamid II, who wasn't a liberal, repealed the Tanzimat reforms when he got into power, seeing as clear kufr. But then after they formed a coup against him, the liberal Ottomans, they formed a coup against him, kicked him out, and then they brought that law back into the Ottoman legal codes, and then that became, the British allowed that code to remain in subsequent countries that were going to be created in the area, like Jordan, for example. So it didn't come from Sharia, didn't come from an interpretation of Islam, came from the West. Likewise, many of the practices in the Muslim world are the result of Victorian era understandings of, like, for example, women's roles, that women shouldn't work. I was like, really? Because Khadija radiallahu anha, she worked. Women shouldn't get involved in business. Again, Victorian era understanding, because Victorian British law, which is up until the mid 19th century, believed that women shouldn't even have a right to dispose of their property, and that was the law. Only it was under this system called couverture, where a woman, and when she was married to her husband owned all her property. And this was a law in post-Enlightenment Britain during its most glorious era, which also kind of refutes the idea that in order to become a great civilization, you have to change your laws about about your like whether equality and rights of women, that stuff they tell us. Now we believe in the rights of women, and we believe that people should be consistently treated under Sharia. We believe these things. However, it's not linked to technological progress, because the West were having some really nasty laws and practices while they were already ahead of us, much ahead of us. The Industrial Revolution, right? And they had these kind of laws during the Industrial Revolution. So it's not linked to technological progress, but that's a different point. Anyway, so a lot of Muslims' perceptions about family roles come from the British, imitating the British 120, 30 years ago, and yet we get blamed for that. They say, oh, you need to reform your Islam. It's like, no, we're just following an older version of, well, you guys, basically. And I think that doesn't excuse it. Anyway, even back then, it didn't, you know, they had no excuse to do so. Anyway, other things, cultural practices that were non-Western. The West isn't the root of all evil. They're just a civilization like any other. But there are cultural practices that predate Islam. Let's take, for example, the practice of clitorectomy in the Upper Nile region and Lower Nile region. It was a pharaonic practice from the ancient Egyptians, 3,000 years. Christians in that region do it. Animists, you can just call them pagans if you want. Animists practice it. So they're non-Muslim, they're not Christian. They follow traditional religions in the region. They've practiced it, but when Muslims do it in that region, they shouldn't have an excuse for it. But when Muslims do it, it gets pinned on Islam. And when you speak to those people who do it, they say, "Oh, this is what we do here. This is what we do here." And it's like, well, I'm sorry, is what you do there better than Allah's commands? I mean, the Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam prohibited clitorectomies. He prohibited it when someone was telling him about the practice, and he set a limit. He said limits, and you can't do clitorectomy. Basically, it's what they practice in that region. But you see, what happens is, and what happens in different parts of the Muslim world was, when Islam was strong, it pushed out these practices to the outer fringes of their society. You know, in the frontier regions, the zones where it wasn't much city life. It wasn't highly developed. They were it was confined to the hillbillies, the hillbilly areas, or the hicks of our past. But when Islamic kind of civilization declined and lost power, and we Muslims lost power, these kind of peripheral practices came back in from the frontier regions, and they came back into the cultures of these places, these pre-Islamic practices. And that's a problem. But people will justify that. What about other kind of practices? Let's take the practice, what they call honor killings. They say this practice is look at Muslims, they kill their daughters. Look, that's what they think Islam tells them to do, or they think they're allowed to do it in Islam. Saying no, well, you know what the Sharia says. If you kill a Muslim, and certainly if you kill your kids, this is Jahannam khaliduna fiha, right? Unless you can somehow get some forgiveness for that, unless you can do something to atone for that in some way, shape, or form, which is let's just say I wouldn't want to have that challenge facing me, because that's really that's a very big challenge. If you can repent in such a way that Allah could forgive you, and I mean Allah's mercy is obviously has no limits, but killing someone, that's a very big sin. That's just putting it lightly. The Sharia is very clear on this. And in many cases, someone could be potentially executed for killing their children, according to a number of schools of thought who don't give protection to their father for doing that. But why do they justify it? Why would some Muslims justify it? Well, before I say that, I want to point out that if in India they do it, Hindus do it, Sikhs have done it, There was a case in England where a Sikh guy killed his daughter because she was being westernized. That was his term used. In Jordan, it was reported a Christian Jordanian Arab guy killed his daughter because she had converted to Islam. Killed his daughter because she had converted to Islam. Yeah, right. But somehow that didn't reach the news reports. I didn't see that on CNN or NBC or the BBC. Yes, it's weird that if a Muslim did it, if a Muslim had done it, it would have been front page news in many places, right? So it's not something limited to Muslims, but there's this idea, and this is the idea of an idea that comes from a deen that's not from Islam. It's the idea that your children can dishonor your family to the point that the only way to redeem your family is to kill your children that dishonor you. And it could be something not just if they did sexual impropriety, but sometimes if they married someone that the father didn't approve of because he's from a different tribe or a different neighborhood. It can be viewed as a family slight or dishonor. Now I want to give another caveat to this. We're talking about people who are a very tiny minority of these places. If you go to this like Lahore or Karachi, city places, sophisticated places, that you won't see this kind of practice. But you can see it outside of it at times in certain frontier areas or villages and things like that. It's not ubiquitous, right? And to think that somehow everyone has that culture is actually ignorant in the first place there. But it's still a culture that pervades. Those things are things that you hear about in the media. There are things that the media don't care about, like, for example, Muslims going to pirs or going to have their horoscopes taken or something to check their stars and see what the future holds for them. Astrology, basically. Muslims engaging in superstitious magic, for example, using charms and talismans. These things the Western nations don't care about, obviously, but these things are equally not from the deen of Islam, and therefore an un-Islamic deen. These are also where culture contradicts with Islam. Although I think one of the biggest, and I'll leave it on this last point, I think one of the biggest contradictions is asabiyya. I've covered ones that the West always prioritize, and I've covered some things that the West don't really care so much, but there's also a problem from the Islamic concept of Tawheed, which you could say is a big thing. But the biggest one that we see enacted in a social way is asabiyya, which is tribalism. And tribalism comes from the belief it's actually an extension of one's ego. So basically, your family is the best family in the neighborhood. Your neighborhood is better than other neighborhoods. Your town, the collection of neighborhoods, your district is better than all districts in the city. Your city is better than other cities. Your area, let's say if you're Punjabi, you're better than Balochis. And then you're Pakistani, you're better than Bengalis from that logic of asabiyya that they hold. And it's so on and so forth, and it extends out. And then they have ranking systems for where you come from. So they ask, even amongst Arabs. So even you think, okay, let's take a group who all call themselves Arabs. Even amongst them, they say Khalijis would view themselves as better than Egyptians, and then they might view themselves as better than Yemenis or better than North Africans. And there's like a little ranking system that goes down. And this is where now people say, and like SJW, aspiring social justice warriors amongst the Muslim community, again, who just went to university, got told a whole bunch of ideologies that made them feel that they could police the world, and then they suddenly went out there with no full understanding of the Aqidah of these things. But anyway, they say the problem in the Muslim world we're seeing, is that there's a problem of racism. Muslims are racist, right? There's racism in the Muslim world against blacks, against between Arabs and Asians and all this stuff. It's racism. And I was talking about this yesterday, actually. I think, or was it? No. I was talking about it on Saturday, actually, in Edmonton. This concept, where I say, why are we adopting terms which are not from Islam? The word racist or racism is racist. Someone said, what the hell? Yeah, it's racist. You know why? What race are we all from? How many races are there? There's only one. Human race. Only one human race. Tribe of Adam alayhi salam. Bani Adam. So to say there's different races came from an era, it actually came from an era where people tried to explain different ethnic groups of humans as being different or divergent or like different species almost. That's where that kind of terminology came from. It just retained itself. So I don't like the term racism or race, because that itself is racist, right? By what it intends to mean. In Islam, we have a more straightforward term. It's called asabiyya, and the asabiyya isn't between whites versus blacks. The asabiyya is really, it's almost like an equal opportunities asabiyya, which is everyone against everybody else. That's the real problem in the Muslim community. And it comes from asabiyya, and it comes from the belief that they can be proud of their nation and be proud of their tribe or ethnic group or what have you. But generally ethnic group kind of means tribe. And an anthropologist will tell you that there's no such thing as racism, there's only tribalism. That makes more sense from an anthropological perspective. Anyway. And people say, but what's wrong with loving your country? Right? What's wrong with liking your people? And I say, no. Didn't the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ teach that if someone has even a mustard seed weight of pride in their heart, won't be going to Jannah, cannot get into Jannah? So then tell me how being proud of your nation is an exception to that rule. I'd like to know. Is it an exception? No. But the difference between being proud of where you're from and just loving the land, the people, the food, the familiarity of where you're from, that's a difference. Like, I come to Canada, I love the adab and akhlaq of Canadians compared to certainly other people around the world. One of the brother that kind of drove me here, he's American, and I don't want to insult him or offend him. But let's say compared to New Yorkers, Canadians I think favor quite well, and have a great politeness. I can like that, and if you're from here, you can enjoy that. You can like that fact. You can like the food. You can like the people, you can like the countryside and the terrain and the geography and the very natural beauty. You can like these things, you can love these things. But to be proud, to say, now this makes me special, now this is going into Jahiliyyah. This is where Jahiliyyah is. Right? I am now proud. I am proud of this. So what makes you proud? Did you create it? Did the country exist because of you? You know, when people say, "Oh, in my ancestry we have," or rather, our people we have Shakespeare, like some English nationalists will say, Shakespeare is our national heritage, and usually there are people, they're coming from the same kind of people who clearly don't have the same language skills as Shakespeare. Let's just put it like that, or mastery of the English language, upon which they expect immigrants to conform. I often feel compelled to say, "You first. You study English first, mate," as we say, right? So asabiyya, it is from a jahiliyyah, from pre-Islam. And this is something that we have to deal with. If you view yourself as better just because you were made from any particular ethnic group, nationality, or from cultural linguistic group, then this is asabiyya, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really doesn't care what your color skin, what your background is, what language you speak, and whether you eat biryanis or kebabs. It doesn't care. It cares your actions, the good deed you did and the bad deed you did. So anyway, I'll leave it like that. There's quite a lot of other things that we can cover, but inshallah, barakallahu feek for listening, and please ask any questions. And if there's anything I've said that you disagree with, please come back at me, comment, and inshallah we can all benefit from that discussion. So, barakallahu feek, and I look forward to your questions. You, sister.
Like going back to the killing thing, is it still like a really big sin if you kill as in like self-defense?
Oh, so the sister was asking, is it a big sin if you kill in self-defense? Well, clearly, if your life is threatened and you defend yourself, not just in the Sharia, but even many law systems around the world, obviously they can't blame you for if you're forced to kill in self-defense. Usually they'd want to make sure it's proportionate. So, I mean, if someone was coming at you with a knife and you had a pistol, and they were basically running at you with it, if you shoot them and then you end up getting a good shot and hitting them somewhere vital and they die, then they might excuse that. But if someone's, let's say, hitting you around the head with one of those foam baseball bat, and then you get your gun out and shoot them, then that is not allowed unless you're a police officer in the United States. No offense.
I got a question. Just to give you a little context, I'm sure it's not maybe different in the UK, but sometimes we have, how can I describe them? Speakers from our Islamic speakers, right? Not necessarily shayukh or maybe just talibul ilm or whoever. And they make some sort of generalized statements like, you know, men should not tell women what to do or whatever, right? Without qualifying it, without saying, oh, you know, in the instance of a husband or instance of a father, none of that. So the question I have is, what do you think is the best way for shayukh, community leaders, etc., to approach ideologies which are negatively affecting our communities, such as Western ideologies plus feminism, which may appear as good to some people as it attempts to undo some real and perceived injustices to women, at the same time highlight and emphasize that there is nothing that a specific ideology or any non-Islamic ideology can assist us with regards to combating injustice that Islam already does?
I think I should give you the microphone and get that record, mashallah.
Yeah. So I mean, we obviously Islam is not against women's rights. We don't, obviously. So what do you advise maybe shayukh and community leaders how to address things such as feminism, which from obviously women's point of view can be some good from it, obviously. But how can we explain this in a good way that everyone can understand that obviously, you know, Islam is, there's nothing that feminism cannot call to that Islam doesn't already take care of.
Okay.
So that it's receptive, you know what I mean?
I think yesterday I talked about, I think in Cooper's Masjid. Yeah. I talked about Muslims unwittingly adopting not just the practices, but the aqidah of certain ideologies which are different from Islam, like secular liberalism and individualism is the aqidah of secular liberalism. So, like Tawheed is the aqidah of Islam, or is part of the aqidah of Islam, and so Sharia would be its manifestation in regards to actions. So, secular liberalism is the Sharia of the aqidah of individualism, just so you understand how that works. Okay. So, certainly in the left-wing kind of scene today, they think that the way to get justice is that we have to divide people into groups based on dichotomies between a power group and a non-power group, and then constantly favor the one who's in power, as the one who's not in power over the one who is in power, to eventually create justice, despite the fact that human beings, let's say. They might say, in the United States of America, white people are the privileged or the top group. Okay? So then they say, right, the way to solve this problem is we have to give affirmative action to those who are non-whites to redress this balance, as well as a number of other things, a number of other things. But I'm going to just pick that one solution they use. But there's a problem with that, which is not all people who are, let's say, white, quote unquote. I don't like that term because, I mean, like there are Iranians, Pakistanis, Syrians who are whiter than, or as white as some Europeans. So are they included in that category? But anyway, so they'll say that they'll say that the way to redress this injustice is we have affirmative action or positive discrimination, right? As we call it in UK. But the problem is that not every, let's say, white American is actually in a privileged position. So you get people who are usually referred to as, was it white trash or trailer park trash or something like this? Yeah. And it's even, and as part of their redressing of what they view as to be injustice, by using the group method or group identity or identity politics method, they basically, you're allowed to even say white trash, but you could never take the word white and replace it with a different color, right? Because that would even be racist, quote unquote. All this, both the assessment of the problem and the solution is different to how Islam would approach it. But Muslims don't know how Islam would approach it, and so we say, yeah, we're against injustice too, so let's follow that. Let's follow that. Whereas Islam, its own solution is, it obliterates group identity. There is no whites, blacks, browns, and browns could be both referred to Indian subcontinent or Hispanics, I suppose, or Asian South Pacific, or what you guys call Asian. We Asians refer to Indian subcontinent in England. We don't divide people into these groups. What did the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ do when he went to Medina? He didn't say, all right, there's the Aus and Khazraj, and they will retain their names, and the people from the people from Quraysh who immigrate, they will retain their names. Nope. You obliterate all these distinctions and said you are one ummah. You're all Muslim. That's it. And there was even a time when two people from the two people were arguing. One was from Aus and Khazraj, and one from Khazraj. And one said in this argument, they started to insult and talk about each other, and they talk about their past victories and the fights they used to have against each other. And then one said to me, Aus, and another one said to me, Khazraj, and they came in. And when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ heard of this, he was, I think you'd be safe to say, disgusted at the return to Jahliyyah exhibited by this. And then the Sahabas repented, right? They repented from this, right? So you're only Muslim. That is your ethnic group now, so to quote unquote. That is your race, if you want to use that term, which I don't. But if you do, that's your race. There's nothing else beyond that. And the Prophet Muhammad, he divided up the Muslims into actually an assessment of their circumstances, the Ansar and the Muhajirin. The Muhajirin had no house. They came to Yathrib, they had nothing with them. The Ansar, the helpers, they were based in Yathrib. They had houses, they had livelihoods. And so he divided them up so that they could understand. The Ansar could then help the Muhajirin. Say, now you're Muhajirin, I'm an Ansar, therefore I have the resources to help you because your circumstance is different to my circumstance with regards to you've immigrated here and you have nothing, and I live here and I've got a house and I've got resources. And that was the only distinction between the two, the Ansar and Muhajirin. But they were one ummah. So Islam would just basically say, at least amongst Muslims, we'd say we are one ummah, and any Muslim who does an injustice to another Muslim, regardless of the reason that motivates it, but that injustice, that will be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So whoever is poor needs to be helped, regardless of what ethnic group they came from or background. And anyone who's suffering domestic abuse or abuse by their partners needs to be helped, and the abuser needs to be punished, whatever their sex, or whatever sex they choose to identify with. Right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the physical attributes of the person committing the crime, or the physical attributes of the person who is receiving the unjust treatment. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. That's how Islam would deal with it. But you said about the issue of women's rights. Many, let's say, I don't want to say shuyukh, but let's just say many people who speak about it. Because the West constantly puts pressure on Muslims and says, Muslims mistreat women. Islam and Sharia itself discriminates against women in a negative way. And so they're so desperate to say, no, we don't, that they keep saying, oh, well, women's rights, right? And it's interesting because the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the one who you would actually improved the lot of women the greatest in terms of the starting position and end position of where they were. So much improved it much better than, let's say, anyone in the 20th century did alone, because they started at one position, and so within his lifetime he made the greatest change. Never used the term women's rights or men's rights. You notice that he never used the term. Why is that? Because there was already an all-encompassing term. It's called justice. It's called justice and giving to people what they deserve, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has directed. Right? Brother has a question over there, or a comment.
So, idealistically, we're all Muslims, right? There's no separate groups, and Islam doesn't separate people by groups, but except for the Ansar and Muhajirin. In a way, you can look at it as the privileged and not privileged, those that have and the have-nots, to help those to make society equal at that time.
Not equal. Who said equal?
Well, to help them, right?
To help them so they meet their minimum needs. Yeah.
So, in terms of justice, like, because you said it's all about justice at the end. So, separating by groups, for example, let's say the Native Americans, right? For whatever happened to them in the Americas, North Americans. And what they're given now, you can look at it as affirmative action, free education, they get taxes off, right, for a lot of things, to kind of, in one way, shape, or form, equalize things, or not, you didn't say equal, but like give them justice or whatever, right, in the West. And then, for example, a lot of, I know you don't like to say white, but like, let's say European, that benefit off of slavery, and that you can point to like historical facts. And there was a story I just read the other week where a young girl found the book of her grandmother who just passed away, having all the slaves that they owned, and the fact that all the property, all the land that they owned benefited directly off of slavery, right? And you can see who these families are. You can trace them back and see these communities, see these people that were negatively affected by that slavery, the condition that they're in versus the condition that she's in, a very powerful position of privilege, and because of whatever her ancestors did to those people. I understand not basing it off of groups, but the ideas behind affirmative actions and reparations, does it not somehow equate to justice? So obviously it's not ideal to say, oh, this group or white group. I agree completely about tribalism, and it's not necessarily about skin, it's about being prideful or saying you're better than X group, or for whatever reason. But I understand Islam is ideal in saying, oh, we're all Muslims, or we're all the human race, which is true. But what about these examples? Whereas where can it, where can the balances be tipped, the scales be tipped, in order to, like, is that wrong? I don't know if you're saying your position of affirmative actions or reparations, is it wrong to give back to those Native Americans or those families that were impacted for hundreds of years of slavery and where they are now versus the people that benefited off of the labor of their ancestors?
Okay, that's a good point. Is that related to what you could? Okay, then let me answer his point. Then I'll get only one question to decide between you two, or join it together. The question. Okay, so you make a that's a very good question, brother. That's an excellent question, and I think so. We're talking about how Muslims would resolve our problems amongst ourselves, certainly in the Muslim world, and the question is obviously what position should Muslims take in the West regarding what we see is injustice committed to the First Nations. Now, here's the thing. We're talking about, at least in Islamic political theory, we will be talking about how people should be treated within a society, within one community of citizens. Okay, but technically the First Nations are a separate nation from the colonializers. And so can be treated as an aggregate group because they are technically a separate nation from the ones that invaded and then brought people with them at later points in time. So it would be the case, to give you an example, brothers. So we know the Hilf al-Fudul, right? The Prophet Muhammad before prophethood was conferred upon him. This happened during this time, beforehand, and he always approved of the Hilf al-Fudul, which was when the alliance of Arab tribes kind of joined together to fight for against an injustice that had been committed against one group of people by another tribe, right? By someone from another tribe. So this is what we'd consider to be, from Islamic perspective, you say international politics. You understand? Between groups of nations, whereby you say one group versus another group. So if one nation has stolen something from another nation, then we should have a redress of that by giving from that nation to another. But if you, but within American society, where of their own citizens, who are all in theory equal, applying the same principle could be difficult. But First Nations is an exception because those people are technically sovereign and separate, although they're under the control and domination of the colonialists of the 13th colonies, unfortunately. So that's why it would be different. But your point is fine, but it doesn't apply to First Nations because then they're not legally, you could be considered to be internal citizens of the United States, although in practice they're kind of treated like that way and so on. But they get exceptions, and certainly First Nations in Canada as well. There's something similar as well. I mean, because it's argued that they didn't have a choice to be citizens in the nation, and therefore they should have some kind of sovereignty or separation in legal theory as a separate group, separate nation. As for the descendants of people who were brought here against their will, so the descendants of slaves taken from West Africa, it's an interesting question, and certainly something that I don't think I can give a simple answer to. And so I will say, as Imam Malik would advise, I don't know with regards to how that should be resolved. But here's the thing. The haves and have-nots. So what about the so-called trailer park trash, who are the have-nots? How do we resolve that at the same time as other things? So, but certainly, you know what, in an ideal world, all I can say is in an ideal world, if we're able to trace everything, anyone who ever stole anything should have it taken off them and given back to those they stole it, or their heirs. How we apply that in practice, that's a different question that I don't think I can give a solution to. But in principle, I agree with the principle, but I just don't know, and maybe we should all think about that if we're going to be advising non-Muslims how they should resolve this issue. Of course, let's say if this issue had occurred in theory, let's say hypothetically, and then America, let's say, all converted to Islam, let's say hypothetically, United States of America have all converted to Islam, we would just kind of we would condemn the ancestors for what they did, and we'd all be equal Muslims, right? And there wouldn't be no need for reparations because we'd all be considered to be one. But those who are poor would still deserve help from those who are rich via the zakah and via many other avenues, which is what the zakah is meant to be doing in the first place. Anyway, so I hope that's some kind of an answer anyway. But inshallah, it's something we should think more about and shouldn't just end there. But one question from the sister, and then I'm going to kind of adjourn for letting us hear she wants to speak. So you sister.
I know that wearing hijab, like some Muslims do and some Muslims do not. So does it fall under culture or religious concept?
So wearing the hijab.
Yeah.
So you're saying some Muslims do and some Muslims don't, yeah. And so this falls on culture. Okay, so the sister asks a good question, which is, does the hijab come under culture? Basically, the hijab being a scarf, just a scarf, as a form of, as a fabric or what have you, or a style of wear, in of itself, the hijab is a cultural style of fulfilling an Islamic obligation. If a woman wants to wear, and some Arab women did in the old times, wore a type of turban, but that covered the hair and was covered up, and had a little like a chin, it went around the chin and it just covered up completely, a kind of female version of a turban. In the time of certainly in the time of the late, after the Tabi'in and Tabi'in, we see this happening. That's a different style. And if you want to, I mean, I don't know, if you want to find an authentic Canadian local variety, you could just wear, those beanie hats and something that it covers the neck and what have you. You could add it all together, the scarves and so on, whereby you just see the face, and you would still be achieving the same result. Because remember, brothers, it's not the style, but the result that Islam cares about. Because what, you think that the Sahabas were wearing shuar kameez? Right, or that hat, what's his name, that Ali Jinnah wears, I don't know, it's a Pakistani kind of hat, it's like a...
Jinnah hat.
Yeah, the Jinnah hat, okay. or the Afghan hat, you think the Sahabas were wearing that? Sorry? Pattu. Okay, it's called pattu, okay. No, but it's just but if that hat, or the types of robes or clothing, or the types of loose trousers, which, I mean, Arabs... The pagan Arabs didn't have what we'd call the pantaloons of the shuar kameez suit and all that kind of stuff, but they had a type of loincloth instead they would wrap around themselves. But they didn't have that. But styles can change, styles can be different, but as long as the hukm is being met, which is, as the Quran says, that a woman is told to draw her head covering, khimar, over their chest, which implies that they're wearing the head covering. So they have to wear a head covering in order to draw it and make sure that their bosoms are covered. But also in the hadith it talks about that. In many narrations of hadith, the Prophet Muhammad in one narration was said that the only thing that should be displayed of woman is this. There's ikhtilaf as to whether he was pointing to the eye or he was pointing to the face. But you can adopt any opinion you wish, what you think is stronger. But how you choose to achieve that, whether it's wearing a scarf, wearing a turban, wearing a Canadian, one of those beanie hats with a scarf that goes around the neck, or what have you. However you want to achieve the hukum, the minimum requirement of the hukum, is up to you, and it's up to your custom and culture. What we mean by that is the habits and practices of the region that you live in. You feel free to adopt the style of clothing of the region you live in, as long as that style meets the Islamic requirements. So if you're in Nigeria, you can wear loose for men, obviously we have to cover our awrah too. You can wear loose clothing of the kind of colourful style that is typical in Nigeria. You don't have to look like a 7th century Arab, pagan Arab, basically.
So basically sisters can take mummies.
So you can what?
Sisters can look like mummies, right? You can describe them.
They can look like mummies.
That's still...
Whether that will be next year's fashion or not, I don't know. But as I said, well, no, because mummies kind of are like skin tight. They've got skin tight wrapping, so that wouldn't fulfill the hukum. So go back to the drawing board there. But I hope that kind of... Do you have any comeback or any kind of anything you'd like to say in response to that, or is there? So you were discussing it. Sorry.
They're talking about the ruling in general. Is it?
Oh, you're talking about the ruling in general, not just the piece of cloth.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, according to all schools of thought, 4 Sunni, 3 Shia, one Ibadi, and the Dahiri school, they all agree that women and men must obviously cover our awrah, and the awrahs generally agreed upon with regards to women was the hair and the body and so on and so forth, whereas men it's from the navel to your knee. And of course some scholars have also argued that men can't also show body shape too as well. So if you're one of those gym nuts that likes to go around in skin tight clothing even when it's this minus 10 degrees and just say I'm just going out for a walk and then like flexing as you do so involuntarily, some people might also have issues with that too.
Excuse me, Sheikh. Whatever question you guys have, just ask them now, and then inshallah basically call them afterwards.
Okay, khair, inshallah. So you say the further question.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure in the Quran it doesn't directly say that a woman should cover her hair, and there's no hadith about that.
Oh no,
it says cover your bodies and your body shape.
Oh no, there is hadith saying that there's many hadiths that say where the Prophet Muhammad is saying that the only thing that should be shown of a woman basically to someone who's not her family relative is the face, or some people say that he was pointing at the eye, but generally the minimum is the face. So there's no ambiguity of that, and the fact that every school of thought from every time of history has always had the same opinion shows there was no people throwing around hats around. People say all this talk of the khimar. I have to get take off my head. right? And in the Quran, it's referring to the khimar. It's the same root from khamr, that which is intoxicant that affects the head. It's a head cloth, basically, right? So it's the same. It's referring to a head cloth. So it's saying you use your head cloth to basically cover the bosoms, but you can't fulfill that hukum if you're not wearing a head cloth in the first place. You understand? So, okay. Okay, so once it's now one for the brothers. You at on the far side there.
When Islam came in, there's multi-cultures. There's the Egyptian culture, the Persian culture, the Chinese culture, the Indian culture, the European culture, and I don't see much contradiction between culture and Islam. Islam, it has its own culture because it added sets of values that Muslims should follow. Men should follow sets of value. Females should follow sets of value, but it did not completely eliminated the other culture. What do you comment on this? Because the whole thing is about culture and Islam.
Okay. Well, it's about culture versus Islam. So if a people adopt Islam, if any people adopt Islam, the very value system they hold to judge good and bad, the purpose of their life, everything changes. You know, who they worship and what is the basis for their worship, how they judge whether something is a good action or a bad action, or is halal or haram. All these things change. But the things that are left behind, or that are not changed, are generally the food minus the Islamic requirements. So no pork and obviously halal meat. But if you're having biryanis, still have biryanis, right? If you're having hummus, still have hummus. And the style of clothing. So as long as your awrah is being protected, if you want to wear a jacket, if you want to wear a thobe, if you want to wear shawar kameez, these things don't have to change. The style of clothing, as long as the requirements being met. And of course the language doesn't have to change either. I mean, it's great if you can speak Arabic, and it's great to learn Arabic. You don't have to ignore or forget all the languages you were speaking beforehand. You can do that as well. You can retain that as knowledge. And of course, certain things are adapted to people's... I was actually discussing this again with the brother that brought me here, which is there are certain things that Islam takes into account, which is urf, right, which is custom. And what I mean by that is, if Islam says, if the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad say, and the Quran say that you're not allowed to insult, so it's not good to insult people with nicknames and just generally deride people, so it's wrong. Now say, if you're an Italian, and the way to express insult is you bite your thumb at them, right? You don't see many Italians do that, but it's a way of expressing insult in Italy. Now, if you're an Arab, or you're from Pakistan, or you're from Malaysia, biting your thumb at someone does not convey insult. So it wouldn't necessarily be prohibited, because if you did that, no one would know what you're talking about, and even you wouldn't be doing it for conveying insult. However, if you're an Italian, and you know that's an insulting thing to do, and it's understood to be insulting, and you do it to intend to insult someone, that might be sinful. Even though the action itself is not specifically haram for other people in other circumstances, because the intention behind that, well, actions are by intention, right? By niyyah, right? The intention behind that was to do something that was haram. You understand? That's where urf will be taken into consideration. Habit. So an Italian Muslim might be, for him personally, might be prohibited from biting his thumb at people, but for anyone else, they might just find it, risible and funny. So they wouldn't take offense. And so that's where there may be differences with how Islam would consider. That's because different cultures, or rather we say, a language can be a part of culture, and culture is really about communication as well. And so if someone wants to communicate insults by an action, not just words, then that might be banned. Of course, you're not allowed to insult anyone in any language, not just Arabic. That's also how Islam takes into account urf, because Islam prohibits the prohibition for you insulting people is in Arabic, right? It's in the Quran, it's in Sunnah, it's in Hadith. This is in Hadith, in Arabic language. But if you're insulting people in, let's say, Swahili, you can't do that either, right? So that's how Islam can recognize urf in certain circumstances. But Islam can never be changed because of urf. And Islam can never be changed because of culture. Just because, well, trust me, if you're Spanish or Portuguese or Italian, that's a culture that loves pork. Pork is in so many dishes. In fact, it's in dishes that are not even meant to have meat in it. Right? I was once eating some like a type of food made with like fried potatoes and then baked with sauce. Right? I was eating it, and it's just meant to be purely potato. And I asked them, "Is there any meat in this?" "Oh no, this is potatoes." Okay. And as I was like digging down into potatoes, and I just lifted up one potato, I saw they had a meat chorizo. There's like a sausage. It's a slice of sausage. I said, "What's this? This is like there's pork in my food." I said, "Oh no, that's just for flavoring." Yeah, because they use it as a condiment. They can use pork as a condiment. And it wouldn't be a meat dish, according to them, because it's not intended to be part of the recipe, it's just flavoring. So should a Portuguese or a Spanish or an Italian Muslim say, "Well, Islam says it's haram, but in my culture, it's allowed to eat pork, so I'm sure, Islam can understand that. And for me, it's halal. I should be allowed to have pork because that's part of my culture." No. And, well, if you want to talk about culture, to the pagan Arabs, if your firstborn child was a daughter, their culture said that was a disgraceful and dishonorable thing. And that the only way to deal with that problem is to execute or is to kill your baby daughter by burying her alive. That was their culture. Should they be permitted to retain that culture when they become Muslim? Can a Muslim Qurayshi say, "Oh, this is part of my culture, so I say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, but this is my culture, so surely I should be able to retain this custom"? No, this is Jahiliyyah. If you ever see that, you'd accuse that person of being jahil before taking him to the authorities. Right? So while Islam, there are many things about certain habits and custom and practice of a region that Islam doesn't interfere with because it doesn't contradict Islam. But there can never be any custom or practice that if it contradicts Islam, it takes precedence over Islam and becomes halal. No. Islam takes precedence for the Muslim over customs and practices of the people in his region or her region. Any other questions or comments? Any from sisters? Are you? Sure, please.
Being a youth, when I grew up in a Muslim household, I was told that being a homosexual is haram, and I was fine with that. But nowadays, me and my friends, we talk about this a lot, and a lot of Muslims are being accepting of the fact that it's okay to be gay. And I was just wondering because I heard this a lot, that it's okay to be gay unless you act on your feelings.
Okay. A lot of people here have similar concerns because I was having a discussion with that same topic just yesterday, I think, with another brother. So the sister asked. She said, there's a discussion about whether is it okay to be gay and Muslim, and certainly in this day and age, there's a lot of pressure about this topic because if you answer in a particular way, you might face a lot of trouble, and people might say, aren't you being unfair to people who are gay and want to be Muslim? Well, I answered this actually. I did a TV debate a couple of years ago, just on can you be gay Muslim on the BBC. You recognize me from that? Yeah. That was you. I know you. That was me. And the argument that they brought me on to basically, again, attempt to pillory me as the conservative ranting fanatic Muslim. Yeah, and I gave them an argument that which was subtle and was from an angle they never even considered. Some Muslims didn't even fully understand it because they were so used to using the term gay and homosexual. And in a nutshell, I'll say this: there is no word in the Quran and Sunnah, or in the Bible, both the New Testament and Old Testament, or even in ancient Greece, as far as I'm aware, even amongst ancient Greeks, for homosexual or heterosexual or bisexual. Doesn't exist as a terminology or a categorization. So then why Muslims use it then? Why are you using non-Shari'i words to give Shari'i judgments? At least use that in the Shari'i judgment, which is like, it's ridiculous. I called Muslims to use authentic Islamic terminology from our own sources to make judgment. The reason why I say this is because this term was invented in the 19th century, late 19th century, by a guy called Richard Kraft von Ebing in his book Psychopathia Sexualis. Yeah, I think so. I think that's the pronunciation. German guy. And he invented the categorization of people into homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual. And then what that created in the West was, then they tried to identify anyone who had certain feelings towards the same sex, and then say that now we're going to label you as this way, and then they begin to discriminate against them based on the label assigned to them. And it's not even an accurate approach to the subject, because a later psychologist who became very famous, Kinsey, famous from United States, he's a guy from the United States, he discovered that basically people couldn't be pigeonholed into certain sexualities, because he discovered that the human nafs, let's just for want of a better term, had all kinds of impulses, and that people who would identify as homosexual sometimes had slight heterosexual tendencies, and some people who identify as heterosexual have sometimes impulses that are of a homosexual nature, quote unquote, and bisexuals are just obviously of both, and it's not necessarily always 50-50 or equal either side, right? So in essence, they determined that the human nafs can whisper all kinds of things, for want of a better way of describing it, and that sometimes incestuous thoughts, sometimes homosexual thoughts or heterosexual thoughts. So then to define people as, you now are a homosexual, and now you have a community called the homosexuals, which has an associated culture and a political identity. This is something that is a bid'ah, a fabric, an invention that then led to them being discriminated more. And my argument on the show was, I said, we don't discriminate against homosexuals because the Sharia doesn't discriminate against homosexuals. You discriminate against homosexuals by labeling them as different from anyone else. You're the ones who discriminate against them. We don't. Discriminate literally means to make different, or to say something is different from something else. That's quite literally what it means. When we use it, we tend to mean treat differently, but it also means to consider differently, or for this kind of treatment. So if people say, you're a homosexual, and you're part of the homosexual community, and you're a heterosexual, and you're part of the heterosexual community, you've already discriminated. Okay? Now, as for the Islamic position on actions, it's quite simple, which is, whatever your feelings you have, whatever tendencies or preferences or tastes you might have in anything, you're not allowed to have intercourse outside of marriage, and you can only marry those who are opposite sex to yourself, who are marriageable and are not family members. So those who are opposite sex, not family, and of the age to get married, that's only when intercourse can happen in that narrow, defined circumstance. Outside of that, it's not permitted. Whether it's someone who is opposite sex, or so zina is wrong. Whether it's opposite sex or same sex, doesn't matter. It's wrong. Full stop. So that's basically the Islamic hukum, and we're not Catholics. You don't get sin just because you have a feeling, because that denies the hadith where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu informed us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised that he will forgive people the whisperings of their nafs as long as they don't act on it. Right? So if you think that someone is sinful just because they have whisperings, you're denying Allah's mercy and the hadith of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I would therefore say that you shouldn't argue, can you be gay or Muslim? You should merely say, can you be Muslim? Yes. And can you practice according to Islam? Yes. you can choose to, right? Then that's the only question we need to ask. Brother at the back.
First of all, thank you to be here with us. My question concerning about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam birthday. In my country where I am from, there is two group of people. One celebrate and other against. There is any hadith say celebrate or not celebrate?
Oh, there's ikhtilaf questions. So the brother said, there in his country there are two groups of people. One celebrate the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's birthday, and other ones don't celebrate Milad al-Nabi, right? As I always say, I'm just a da'i, right? I like to consider myself as someone who just points out the obvious in things, or just points out facts that people should be able to have found themselves if they checked or had the time to check or what have you, right? I'm not here to take positions on ikhtilaf matters that are subject to dispute between people. So my advice to you is not about what the two groups of people in your country are doing, but more what you feel personally after looking at the evidence objectively on both sides, what you think is the strongest opinion. And that only you can answer. So I leave it to you to look at the evidence. I would advise you to look at the evidences, look at all the arguments. What do you feel is most likely what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would have wanted, and then you make the choice to whether to celebrate or not based on what you think is the strongest opinion. And that's all I can say. Yes, so, oh, you sister.
I don't know if you already answered it in the other question, but I saw the video of could you be gay and Muslim, and one of the girls was debating about if you are gay then you shouldn't be Islam, and you can't be gay and identify as a Muslim.
Yeah.
So, could you already answer that?
Okay, so the sister said on that TV show, it was actually on the BBC Three. There was these two sisters in the audience, and one of them was arguing to the person who was they brought on a person who identified as being gay and from a Muslim background, and they said, if you're gay, why are you being Muslim? Like, why are you Muslim? And if you want to be gay, Islam is the choice, and so why you don't choose to be Muslim if you want to be gay, or if you are gay. And this was the worst possible message she could have ever said on that show, especially after I had spent a lot of time presenting a very nuanced argument, and I had also been critiquing a particular secular liberal guy from a Muslim background who likes to call for reformation of Islam, called Majd Nawaz. He's our version of your Tariq Fateh. You know Tariq Fateh?
Yeah.
He's our so we have a fan there. She undid all my work by allowing him to say, look at that Muslim over there, look at that, that's the kind of mentality, that's a problem. Because when you say to the average Westerner, you can't be gay and Muslim, you use the word gay and then you say you can't be gay and Muslim. So that's two things that you did there, which I would kind of advise against. What they hear is you saying that if someone has a feeling that they can't control, they are already sinful and going to hell, and that they cannot choose to believe in Islam. Both completely ridiculous points. But whenever you say it, that's what they understand you're saying. Which is why I don't even want to use the term heterosexual, bisexual, homosexual. I merely say same-sex intercourse and all intercourse outside of marriage is prohibited in Islam, as we know from Islamic basis. That's it. Faqat, as they say in Arabic. That's it, done. Right? And there's nothing further. But she basically said that. And what was even more tragic was that the individual who identified as gay, he seemed to have a better understanding of Islam than she did. Because he was saying, because she was saying, why are you choosing to be Muslim? Why are you choosing to be Muslim? And he was saying, look, in the Quran it says only the action is prohibited. Yeah, I remember. Do you remember that? He was saying only the action is prohibited. And she was saying to him, in essence, no, you should takfir yourself. You should go out of Islam and leave it. And you know what? Initially, many, what you find with many, unfortunately, well, maybe this is with the public in general, with all humans in general, is many people will first hear this in the superficial level who take that side, who take the side of obviously like Islam, and those who take the side of the other side, or those who like those who take the side of Christianity, or those who take the side of atheism. They will cheerlead for whatever they think is said very confidently, regardless of whether it makes sense or it's not self-defeating. And there were brothers commenting on the YouTube comments saying, "Oh, mashallah, I wish I have a wife like her. Wish I could find someone like her. Is she single?" Question mark. And it's like, oh, that's yeah. So even the guy who identified as gay in that particular exchange was more closer to the haqq than she was when he said, look, it's only the action which is prohibited in the Quran. So anyway, I'm getting everyone to rewatch that, isn't it? There you go. But anyway, so I hope that answers your point, that basically what I said before was we don't categorize people using the word gay. We don't categorize people by using the word heterosexual or bisexual or any of that kind of stuff. We just simply say you're all insan, you're all human beings, and there's the halal and there's the haram in terms of actions. And there's the truth and falsehood in terms of beliefs. Accept the truth and abide by the halal, avoid the haram, and reject the falsehood, and you'll be successful. And that's the only consideration that we have. You brother in the corner. Wa alaikum salam.
Yeah, I just so I have a question about the militant atheists. They're going and they're trying to say that it's okay to discriminate against people's religion because it's a choice, whereas their color or they're born like that or their sexuality, it's their, So what do you think about this?
I actually I debated some atheists who argued this in 2000. I was in 2012 actually. It was all the way back in a university in UK, and they tried to say that religion is a choice and should not deserve any particular rights or protection. So that your right to religious practice shouldn't be protected because it's different to skin color. Let's just say, and I reversed it back on them, and I said, your religious beliefs is even more important than skin color. Why? Because skin color or ethnic group or nationality or nationality, these things are kind of ephemeral or ambiguous concepts, but let's just go with physical appearance and sex. So they also said like discrimination based on sex, so whether you're male or female, right? All these things are just superficial. They're just skin deep. Your beliefs and your character defines who you are. So your belief is more important and more fundamental to you defining who you are than the superficialities of how much melanin you have in your skin and eyes and hair.
More worthy to be protected.
More, and of course, who said it's a choice? I mean, nifaq is a choice. Hypocrisy is a choice, yes. But what your conscience tells you of the truth is not a choice. I mean, sure, I could choose to say I'm not Muslim anymore, but I could never choose to tell my conscience that it's false, because it tells me it's true. From all the evidence, after careful evaluation of the evidences, I can't change my mind about it. I can just cover it over, which is what kufr means, right? Kufr means covering, to cover over. I can pretend it's not true, but I can't change my conscience. So it's not a choice, but unless you count nifaq as a choice, so you can choose to be a hypocrite. So unless they want to say we don't want to protect people's rights because they can choose to be hypocritical and unprincipled, then which I've yet to see an atheist argue.
I have a question, yeah.
You have a question. He's going to use moderator's privilege to answer. I'm just going to alternate the sisters to having other questions from the sister's side. No. Sorry? Do you know what? I just want to use one example. The sister there with the hoodie, she's complying with Islamic ordinances, but the style is not a hijab, it's a hoodie, using the hoodie style, right?
Yeah, it's a turban.
And a turban, right?
Yeah.
So you see, the styles can be different as long as the requirement is met from the Islamic hukum. So anyway, that's an illustration of the point. Anyway, so I'll ask you, sir, then I'll let you ask a question. So you, sir. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
My question is in regards to Islamic ruling of when we can, as Muslims, give our daughters for marriage.
Yeah.
Is age of puberty, right? Yeah.
Not just that, but anyway, yeah.
Okay. So I guess the law in this country is different. Where do we fall in terms of that? What should we do?
Okay, so the brother asked a question saying that in Islam, you're allowed, if someone becomes marriageable, male and female, they become marriageable when they reach the age, when they reach at least one of the criteria is puberty. Another criteria is being thiqah, which is like sound in mind, but also it should be sound in body as well. Sound, and actually the Quranic verse mentions sound in mind and body with regards to those orphans who basically you give them their inheritance when they are able to, when they're mature, when they're adults, and it gives actually 3 criteria, right? So it gives, if you add the sunnah to that, the criteria is that they must be sound in body, sound in mind, so mature in mind, mature in body, and obviously able to reproduce, right? So they reach the time of reproduction. Now, maturity in mind and body obviously is physical, so is one thing, and obviously they're able to reproduce, so they have obviously they're menstruating or they are producing sperm and so on, right? But when it is mature in mind, I think in the West that's not really an issue anyway, and not really a problem, because I would argue that in the West, people don't reach mental maturity for marriage until in their 20s. According to the Islamic criteria, I don't think they're actually able to get married or be mature as adults. Heck, I even say in some cases with certain people, it's even in their 30s. But in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, people matured a lot faster. And you mature people by giving them responsibilities, right? And work and so on, right? And they matured much faster. So in this day and age, because people don't have responsibilities until they're ready in their 20s, I would argue it's a moot point. What you're asking, it will never conflict. In fact, you could argue that the age of consent in Canada is too low. Should be risen up. You could argue that, but Islam doesn't make a one-size-fits-all law. It's on a case-by-case basis, right? So you might find an 18-year-old who is really mature and is a sound body and so on, and fine. But you might find someone who's 25 and still not fully sound and mature in their mind to get married and so on. They would be considered to be a kid by our ancestors in how they think, right? Not mature enough. So that's a moot point. But let's say hypothetically, you encountered, I'm not sure what's the age of consent in Canada.
18, but if you got parents' permission, 16, at least in Ontario.
With parents' permission?
16, at least in Ontario.
I would love to hear conversations between the kids and say, Mom, Dad, can I sleep with this guy or this girl, please? I'm 16. Could you sign this form? And so on.
They don't need that, don't worry.
They don't need that, okay. Let's say, or in England it's 16. Okay, so in England it's 16. But let's assume then that you're in a state in the United States or in a part of Canada which says 18, and you're 18, but the person is 16 years old, let's say. What to do in that circumstance? They want to get married, but they're 16 and the law says 18. Well, there's 2 things that come into play here, I think. One of them is that we live in a country with a assumed agreement between us and the government, which is that we're under dhimma, a covenant, right? That we will generally not transgress the laws in the country that we are in. Not that we say that the law is better than the Sharia, but we just say that I mean, okay, Sharia is actually has more restrictions, right? The law says you can drink, but we don't drink. We're not allowed to drink alcohol. So we agreed to abide. So you should tell the 16-year-old to wait 2 years, so that they conform to their dhimma agreement, to their agreement as under the covenant, right? That would be the best, the best argument. The second point would be that, I mean, why also subject yourself to being arrested and having that treatment anyway, negative treatment. This is in the hypothetical. The person's 16 and the law is 18. We're talking about hypothetical here. So let's say satisfy the dhimma that you're under, and that's part and parcel of what it is to be a Muslim living in this land. We have an implied agreement with the government. So that would be my response, I think, to that point. Anyone else?
This is
fairness to you. Maybe we should. Yeah.
Brothers, I'm here for you. It's like I don't come right here often, so squeeze every last drop you can out of me. Oh yes, I forgot.
Yeah, it's okay. Okay, I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this because it's in front of me, and so you don't have to repeat my question.
Sure.
So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Jazakallah khair for the lecture. So I think, from what I understand is, from the stuff that you said, it's all interrelated. But culture in general, because before coming here, I personally believe that culture, one of the biggest problem for us as Muslims is that we've taken Islam as a culture. If you understand culture as the urf and the customs and the things that you do that Islam hasn't brought a legislation for. So you said Islam is a deen, like a way of life, all encompassing with legislation, and Allah is the authority. So basically culture is kind of intertwined with our identity formation, who we think we are. So if you're in Canada, you can be Sudanese Canadian, Kurdish Canadian, whatever you associate yourself with. But the things that you associate yourself with in regards to, if they're urf, like what you eat, what you drink, the clothes you wear, you alluded to a lot of that stuff in the lecture. Those things technically shouldn't affect your identity and how you're seen from the people around you. So for example, if I'm Sudanese and I don't like food, we eat beans, like it's a national staple, right? If you're Egyptian and you're Sudanese and you don't prefer to eat beans, that shouldn't affect, for example, your identity, how you feel about being Sudanese, and how people see you, oh, he's not Sudanese. But because we're allowed to pick and choose in culture, we've transferred that to the religion. So someone can say, oh, I'm Muslim, but I drink, because they've taken that aspect into the deen. Or I'm Muslim, but my boyfriend is Muslim, something like that. Or I only pray on Jum'ahs, but that's because it's whatever, the intentions are in the hearts, or this is where I'm now. So I think personally, that was the biggest kind of thing that I thought was the biggest factor, is the transferring of the urf into picking and choosing what's acceptable, and having that not affect your identity. So I don't feel any less of a Muslim because I have a girlfriend, or because I drink, or because I choose to do these things that now I'm the legislator. But from what you said, I wanted to ask, because these things are so problematic when it comes to picking and choosing, now as a parent, I'm fine with my child, because it becomes the pride thing, right? How do you really deal with pride? Because now pride has become the culmination of all these choices we've made in our lives that we've associated with Islam. So, okay, I'm from X culture, and I don't want my child to marry from this culture because I don't think it's appropriate, or I think it's superior, or whatever. So for us, as people who distinguish that's not from Islam, how do we deal with those type of people? Do we just be patient until that generation passes away on their pride? Or do we, how do you interact? Basically my question is, because those people throughout their lives, they've made choices where they feel it doesn't affect their Islamic identity. They're choosing of their children not to marry from this culture. Doesn't affect who they are as a Muslim in their perception. How do you interact with people like that when you tell them something Islamic and they have their view? Is it just I have my way of life and you have your way of life, both interpretations of Islam, even though one is wrong? Or do we just be patient and say these are the OGs and the seniors, and inshallah they're going to perish and we're going to revive the ummah? So that's the question, inshallah.
Okay, so the brother asks actually a number of great questions, which I think can allow us to explore some other areas that hasn't been covered yet. So I do it in reverse order, mainly because that's how my memory works. So when it comes to, if someone finds someone, so if someone wants to marry someone else, so a sister or a brother wants to marry someone else, and that person is from a different part of the world, where they have, or they come from a background where they were used to doing different kinds of customs or food or styles of dress. And the parents say, oh, you shouldn't marry this person because this person's from a different culture. Yeah, we're all Muslim, but this person's from a different culture. No, well, a different culture. They can't say different deen, right? They say different culture. So the only thing that the parents could say to the child is, if you feel comfortable with that person's practices and food and so on and so forth, then Bismillah. And if not, and you wouldn't feel comfortable, and you feel it's something that won't be reconcilable to yourself, so you won't then be happy or you won't be content in such a marriage, then you might take that into consideration. But if the daughter or the son turns around to their parents and say, I know about the food, I know about the styles of clothing, I know about the language, and I'm completely fine and comfortable with that, and marrying into that, and I'm happy to do so, then the parents, unless there is a religious or defect or a defect of deen with the person that person wants to marry, there is no excuse for them to prohibit that marriage or to get in the way of that marriage. And in theory, or rather as was in practice, if the father didn't want to marry his daughter off to someone because he didn't like their ethnic group, what have you, and he couldn't be prevailed upon to change his mind, then that sister had the right to either ask another male family member to be the wali. If she couldn't find any, she would ask the caliph of the Muslims, or rather in practice a judge or his deputy, because these are deputies of the caliph. The caliph would be the wali amr. As this is in the hadith, the imam is the wali of those who have none. Of course, we don't have a functioning jurisprudential system. We don't have an imam or caliph, which is just another reason why how Islam is meant to be integrated or can't be separated from the idea of requiring such an institution of the issue of a caliphate. But anyway, what do we do in this day and age? Not in this day and age, but just in this current circumstance. Maybe it will change, hopefully, inshallah, where a sister or a brother might not be able to prevail upon their parents, and there is no caliph upon which they can go to. Some people have said that in the absence of a caliph, while this is a sin which Muslims will have to remove from their necks, the absence of it, there's a makeshift solution, which is you go to your local Muslim judge, as in an alim or a mujtahid preferably, and you get that person to marry you and be the wali, or at least to give permission to be wali amr. But then this obviously means that their parents might get really angry with this if they get married without their consent, and it could lead to problems.
More problems.
But but let's just say if they're willing to get married no matter what, saying, look, I need this as a protection against zina, and my parents, I don't want to cut off from them, but if they cut off from me, that's their choice. But I won't cut off from them. And the parents cut off, then that's something that the parents, usually what happens is the parents will initially cut off, and then eventually they'll reconcile after a couple of years, a worst case scenario sometimes, right? But in the absence of having living in an Islamic government under a caliph, the Muslim community has to come together, speak to their local imams, and speak to the people that the mosques that the parents go to, and socially pressure and shame people who have asabiyyah in their hearts that prevent people from getting married. Shame them. They should be ashamed. That's a bit uncharacteristically harsh from me, but they should be ashamed of themselves. If you have asabiyyah in your heart and you're preventing someone from getting married, we know that there's a hadith from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ saying that if someone basically comes to, basically to paraphrase it, if someone's coming to you as your father, and someone's coming to you to get married to your daughter, your son, and you can't find any defect in that person, Islamically speaking, right? They're a righteous person, they're a principled person, and you don't let them get married, then there will be fitna, there will be trials and tribulations and in essence injustice and oppression throughout the ummah. And so it's a big thing. If you don't let young people get married when there's no defect religiously, there's no reason why they can't get married from an Islamic perspective, that the guy has the money to, let's say if it's your daughter and the guy approaches, or the daughter wants to marry him and he has good morals, he's known for having good morals, he has a job and he can provide it to a good comfortable level, then there's no reason that the father should say no. The whole point of the father supervising this is to because he knows guys, right? A man knows other guys, knows men, and so he can tell the quote-unquote players from the sincere people, right? That's the whole point of getting the father involved, is the father protects the interest of the daughter because he can tell when someone is basically the wrong kind of guy, right? She might not be able to tell, but he can, right? But if he prejudices that process with his asabiyah, then he has committed a grave injustice, and you should help people. You should help young people in your community to get married by, if you find that this is the case, and it has to be, you have to make sure that this is the case. Don't just run off and like jump the gun and just think someone's doing it. If that person is clearly says, I don't want to marry my daughter to this person, or I don't want to marry my son to this person because I don't like where they're from, I don't like how they look, or the ethnic group, or what have you, when that person's on good deen, and then you should shame that person and give that person nasiha and ask that person to do tawbah, to do repentance.
A lot of times they say those things not because they mean it, but it's because of embarrassment of what other people think. So if you have one community and they'll say, oh, what are the elders are going to think? So we have to prevent this in order to people not to judge us. Not because sometimes the parents are racist or they hate other cultures, but I think just from an experience from my part of the community is because embarrassment of but to please other people and not to please Allah. So I think that's one.
So if parents are doing it not because they personally have an issue with who their daughter or son is marrying, but because they're worried about how they'll be judged by the community, then you have a problem with the mentality of that community, and that community needs to be publicly shamed by the imams and in the khutbah. Yeah, and in the mosque, in the Friday prayers, in the khutbah, and in like you need then there should be a dawah campaign.
Well, that's part of the issue, to be honest with you, Sheikh. That's why I asked you the question I asked you before, is because we have so many issues, and so many, unfortunately, we respect our scholars, we respect them, but so many are steering away from these issues that are of the utmost importance. And this is one of the most cancerous things, if I can say it. And I'm going to say cancerous. It's worse than that, but it's cancerous in this community and elsewhere. This asabiyah, as you say.
Yeah. I would agree with how serious it is because, you know what causes division amongst the Muslim community is when Muslims don't stick by Islam to each other, and then people give up on having faith in the Muslim community, right? So if there are sisters who have been abused by their husbands, and the Muslim community doesn't do anything about that, doesn't shame the guy, doesn't do any intervention at all, and just tries to brush it under the carpet, then they're going to lose faith in the solutions of Islam because they're not seeing it working. Not necessarily they reject Islam. I'm not saying that they think Islam doesn't work, but rather they will say, you know what, if you're not going to follow Islam, neither will I. That reasoning is wrong, so it's a silly reasoning. I mean, in essence, you're saying, well, if you're going to go Jahannam, I'm going to go Jahannam too. Yeah, like, really? Do you really want to go there? Right? But in a nafs way, that's what happens, right? So I've seen this when people say, like, because of the asabiyah in the Muslim community, like many reverts, and not reverts necessarily from backgrounds such as like they were previously from quote unquote European Americans, or what we call whites. Actually, I call them European Americans. yeah, I can say it. European Americans. If we say African Americans, right, just to be consistent. So not them, but let's say African Americans or African Canadians. Is that what you say here as well? Yeah. So if they convert to Islam and then they are basically encounter the typical Muslim asabiyya, which I don't think they fully realize is actually against every other Muslim from any other background too. You know, like I said, equal opportunities asabiyya. Muslims will hate everyone else, even within their own country, equally, right? So no, don't get married to him. He's not from the right tribe or family or whatever, or neighborhood. Yeah, not just ethnic group. But they don't know just how the asabiyya works in the Muslim community. So they will recognize that behavior was similar to what they faced from non-Muslims. And so they'll think, well, if you're going to treat me like this, then why should I have unity with the Muslim community if I'm still being treated like I'm different because of my skin color or ethnic group or background and so on. And then that means that they become disillusioned, and then you start seeing splits, and even splits where for example, there was an article written by a quote-unquote white Muslim in the UK, and then she gets attacked by Asian or Indian subcontinent Muslims because, oh, you're a white person saying this, and you get the same repetition of the stuff you see in the non-Muslim community in the Muslim community. And I'm like, I thought we were meant to be better than this as Muslims. How is Islam a benefit if we just repeat what people who are not benefited by Islam do? Then what's the point of Islam if it doesn't change you? One of the beautiful things I liked about Islam is when I came into Islam was that every concept of division that was revealed to be artificial and just done away with. And you think, okay, but what about even European American, European Canadian reverts get discriminated against by Muslim asabiyya? Yeah, like what you'll find is they'll say, oh, it's really great you converted, really excellent. Okay, goodbye. Right, now I'm going to go back to my own community and do my own thing. And also, the reverts will constantly be talked down to like they don't know much about Islam. They might even be for a Muslim longer than the Muslim who talks down to him has been alive, and yet they'll still be treated like they're just a convert yesterday kind of revert. They just became Muslim revert. That's how they'll be treated to continue. Because they think, oh, you can't know much about Islam more than me. You're white. Like it's great you convert to Islam, but you're just an infant in Islam, right? So in essence, my issue is Muslim prejudice due to the Jahiliyyah mindset. And before I've noticed there's a hand up there, but before I answer that, there was one other point that this brother mentioned, which I think was really good, and I want to explore very briefly, which is, he said that the problem is, when he heard about this discussion, he remembered that there's a big problem with Muslims who follow Islam like a culture, right? Follow Islam like a culture, and so they can pick and choose, right? I would actually say that while I understand what he means by that, and what he means by that, and many Muslims say this as well, is that we follow Islam from a non-ideological perspective. What do we mean is that we follow it as a checklist of things that you should do, that your parents told you should be doing. But they don't understand that Islam is a whole world view with a world project and a transformational goal, and a universal message that you should be actively trying to do, rather than, okay, worship God, that's great, but I've got a life I have to lead, and while I'm living my life, just make sure that I just fulfill this checklist criteria, but just live my life for myself and my family, or for my parents to be proud of me. But while doing so, just make sure you don't eat pork while you're doing that, right? Whereas the ideological perspective, which is, what can I do to worship Allah in all these areas of my life and activity? How do I advance it? How do I improve it? And how do I spread the message of Islam? How do I create more justice, fi sabilillah? How do I spread compassion, fi sabilillah? Practically, when you're looking at your life as a means to achieve a goal, rather than Islam as something that you just have to bear in mind while you're living your life for yourself. And I think that's what the brother means by culture. And I've used it too in that same kind of way myself. But I would say that really, when you talk about Muslims who pick and choose, that's because they're following Islam as a religion. And what do I mean by that? Remember, the Islamic word for what Islam is a deen. a belief and way of life. Following it as a religion and culture, these are things that were, imagine deen separated into two parts, aqidah and practice, and amal. What they want to create in Muslims after secularism is that a Muslim will just call themselves a Muslim, and they can say they believe in the stuff, but in practice, their culture is different. So they want the secularism in a way, or this kind of secularizing force that we face ourselves, makes Muslims into following Islam as a religion, as an aqidah only. But in practice, you have your other cultures you have to follow. And so that's what I said. And you said one other point, and so I will add this one more because this is about identity. You said Muslims just calling themselves Muslim, and that's it. They can do anything else they want, and they don't have to follow it. They can drink, and they call themselves Muslim at the same time. I mean, yes, of course, you can commit sin and still describe yourself as a Muslim, as long as obviously you feel bad about that sin. If you don't feel bad, then there's no iman in your heart, right? If you feel okay about it, then there's no iman in your heart, right? You have to at least feel bad that you're doing it.
Like some of them delegitimize it. It's not a problem for them. Like
yeah.
Even in the legislation, out of jahl.
Oh, so you mean that those who justify it?
Yeah, like they can choose. Like it's not a big deal.
Yeah, of course.
Game, yeah.
And this brings me to I think the point, and then I'll take you the questions or we'll adjourn. But people, if people are told, especially in Western society, where you have the choice, choice and the individual is like paramount. I was talking about it yesterday. That you, as the individual, the halal and haram comes from people's choice, not from anything higher than the individual, from God. And certainly religion or society, they say the individual is the highest criteria of halal and haram. Man, the measure of all things, as one Greek philosopher said, right? So then if a person chooses to identify themselves as a Muslim, even if they believe in un-Islamic things that go against the Quran and Sunnah, they say their identification is just as legitimate as anyone else's. Right? That's what they say. And they've taken it to its logical step where you think, if you thought maybe I could refute this by saying, well, look, if someone's a guy and they say they're a woman, does that make them a woman? And they'll say, yes, it does. Right? They're even consistent on it. They're even consistent in following that logic to its conclusion. Yeah. Whereas I think what we'd say, what the Quran and Sunnah describe is that Islam isn't an identity, or being Muslim is not an identity. Being Muslim is a description. If you believe in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and you accept the Quran and you accept all the words of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all the words you believe to be from the Prophet, you accept it without hesitation and reservation, then your description is that you are a Muslim. Now maybe you might not be the most perfect of Muslim, but if you ever were a person who avoided the serious major sins, and you did your obligations, and you believed with a strong iman, then you can be described as mu'min, and we'd all hope to be mu'min. But no one can. It's interesting that no one would ever identify as a mu'min, right? Because they know that's the description. Well, same thing. Muslim means you have declared that you have submitted, right? That your tongue submits. Your heart will take a bit longer, but it's a description. But if you then declare that you don't submit by accepting that alcohol is halal, then by definition and description, you're not a Muslim. No matter how much you call yourself. So it's great you asked me that question. You asked me your question because it allowed me to bring 3 other points I didn't say before. So barakallah feek, brother. But I hope that's kind of made it clear our responses. Any other final questions, comments, or comebacks?
We'll just take to this brother, and then Yusuf, you had a question, and then.
Sure.
No more questions. I think we should adjourn.
Let the brother finish because he waited for like 15 minutes.
Make it the last question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Honestly,
I appreciate your patience, brother.
Thank you, brother Idrisi, for Andalusi, right?
Yeah.
Andalusi for coming and enjoy the lecture. And the Andalus is an old name of Spain. I don't know if you know.
And Portugal.
And Portugal too, yeah.
I'm not saying that from an Asabiya basis. I'm just saying for accuracy.
The Andalus is a music too. It's played in Morocco.
Yes. Yep.
My question
Similar to flamenco, I've heard.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
I'll start my question from the last, which is Islam, Aqidah, wa Sharia. What I understand from the beginning, because of the accent and my English and French, the way it's like you're defending Sharia alone. I just want to know if that's what you're doing, like, is that the right way to do? Because I know a lot of countries like Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and the failure of Sharia law in Egypt, in Somalia, and now even in UK, I see that Sharia law, a lot of Muslims now, they start putting it there by, for example, like patrolling the masjid at night and chasing the English people out of the masjid, and like I just want to hear from you, are you with the Sharia law or are you against
Oh,
the Sharia law?
you said you speak, was it French and other language?
I speak French, but my English is not really.
Ah, ok.
So I make a mistake.
Si vous voulez, tu peux me demander votre question en français et je peux te reprendre. See, I'm being Canadian compliant, right? English and French, right? That's what you have to. Non, je peux expliquer, je peux faire une traduction.
C'est mieux de parler anglais.
Anglais, ok, ok.
Et je m'excuse pour mon anglais.
Ok, pas de problème. Ok.
So I just want to know, are you with the Sharia law? Because it seems to me like you defended it in the beginning.
Yeah.
You said this is not Sharia law. This is the Napoleon. Six-Pico,
Yep.
Then you have to know what's going on in Shabab. For example, in Somalia, people are running away from Sharia, stoning to death, cutting your hand. If you steal $200, they cut your hand. Qasas in the street in Saudi Arabia. I mean, Sharia law in my country, no, never.
Okay.
So I want to know what's your opinion about that. And to me, in England right now, they want to put it in. And the English people, I mean, a couple thousand people, let's say a million, how many Muslims in England, and you just come to work and look for peace, and now you're putting something.
Putting something where?
Putting something to the English people, like let's.
Putting something to English people. Okay, I think I know the nature of your.
Comparing the Sharia law to the English people.
No, who said this?
Well, that's what we saw. It's debating in the parliament. It's a big problem. The English people right now are scared from the Sharia law to get it in. They see it's a threat. Don't feel it's a threat.
Well, in the 1890 from 1890 to 1940s in Europe, they were saying that Jews and Jewish law is a threat to Europe, and in England, from 1600s to at least 1800s, they said Catholic law is a threat to England, right? The thing is, just because people say something is a threat, doesn't mean that it is a threat. It just means that they suffer from hatred and prejudice against minorities in those countries. And Muslims are not the first victims of this prejudice and hatred that they have, all right? That they have held against minorities in their country. I think I explain, brother. I appreciate your question. I appreciate. However, what I would say is that, I say it with respect, because many Muslims are in the same circumstance. But your perspective on the Sharia is a product of French colonialism in the Muslim world to make us hate our own deen on some aspects. And I'm not saying you're deliberately hating the deen. I'm really saying that that we are told to think that the Sharia is no longer required by our deen. You understand? And so we leave it behind in the past, thinking it's in the past, right? Whereas what's happened with the Napoleonic Law Code is that we changed parts of our Sharia for aspects of European law that were horrific and that was going backwards. But the thing is this, when you talk about Al-Shabaab in South Somalia, you're talking about a group of people who in essence are applying whatever thing they believe is the law as vigilantes. You know, vigilantes, when someone doesn't have authority and starts to enforce the law. If your neighbor starts to enforce the law and arrest people, and he's not a police officer, are they going to get it right? Are they going to be a good police officer? They're not trained, and they start executing people or like putting people in their basement in cages for life imprisonment. They would get arrested for that. Why? Because the law can only be applied by the police and the law courts. And why is that? Because only the police and the law courts know how the law should be correctly applied. People just saying, I'm going to apply the law of Canada by myself now, is not going to get it. You're not going to see good actions from that person, right? You're not going to see them know what to do correctly, and they're going to get it wrong. They're going to get it so wrong. So did you know that in Islam, if someone steals to feed themselves, right, because they're poor, and they have to feed themselves, their family, they can't be punished. Yeah. Yeah. No. Who said cutting their heads is part of? Qasas is not part of theft. No. Qasas. Well, let me explain. Qasas is if someone cuts your head, then your family has the right to demand that they be executed for cutting your head. That's Qasas. Right? Stealing $200 is you don't cut people's heads off for stealing $200. That's not Qasas. You see, the thing is, I think you don't understand Islamic law and on these aspects. No, that's not what. Who's they? Who does this?
You see now the bad name of Sharia. Now
yeah.
To Daesh too. Now they claim it in the win Sharia too.
Why would we worry about them?
You know what I mean?
But brother, Daesh, they burn people alive, yeah?
In the name of Sharia.
Wait. Do you know that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ explicitly prohibited using fire and burning people? So this is the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. So then how is this Sharia? Yeah, and the American government likes to invade other countries saying this is in the name of justice and freedom. Does it mean that this is justice and freedom? That to kill people and bomb people in the name of justice and freedom. American government. Does that mean it's justice and freedom? Because they say it? Well, what do you expect people to say when they commit crimes? They say, we are doing this in the name of we want money and power. Support us, please. You think they're going to say that? You think anyone's going to say this? They're always going to say, we're doing this for justice, for rights, for freedom, or for Sharia, or what have you. They're going to say that. They're going to say that because they want you to support them. Or they don't want people to criticize them. And they say, no, what we're doing, it's okay, it's part of Islam. Or it's part of freedom and democracy. Right? So if you're saying to me that you believe people when they tell you what they're doing, when they just tell you what they're doing it for, then please, brother, never ever go shopping and speak to a salesperson. Right? Never. Never ever. Okay. Okay, so you...
Is that doesn't exist? That's Sharia.
Well, actually, okay, stoning that doesn't exist. Well, you mean, is it being applied? I don't know of any place, any government in the Muslim world that's currently doing that. But that being said, I'm talking, if we're going to discuss the Sharia and what it says about adultery, right? About adultery, yeah? Where a person's wife or husband cheats on them in public, right? The limit, the level of evidence required for this is so much so that the only person that's ever, Jazakallah. Sorry, Barakallah Feek, brother. Barakallah Feek. So I was distracted. The evidence of required is that only someone who wants to parade it in public and basically commit zina in public where people can see it deliberately can be punished for this. But then again, even in Canada, you can't do zina in public. Right? Even in England, you can't do. Now, sure, the punishments are different, but guess what? in Islam we recognize that if someone tries to commit adultery in public and publicly displays it, it's not just a crime affecting their husband or wife. They are actually attacking the institution of marriage and family by making it public. And it has to be public, but it will usually only happen in the house, right? It will usually only happen in the house. So the only time the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we know, ever punished people for it was when they came to him and confessed. And they said, we've done this, punish me for this. I don't want to face Allah's punishment on the Day of Judgment. I want to be punished now. I don't want to be punished. They begged him, and there was one time where, there was many times that when they would go to the Prophet Muhammad to confess, and he turns his head. And they confess, and he turns his head again. He doesn't want to hear it. And then when the person, said a third time, he said, look, he asked him, "Are you insane? Right? Do you have?" And the person said, "No." And so he said, "Look, if you had kept it secret, you didn't make it public, I would have asked Allah to, you could have asked Allah to, you could repent to Allah and ask Him to forgive you. You don't have to make it public. What are you making it public for?" But they wanted to make it public because they wanted to be punished, because they were scared of the Day of Judgment, Allah's punishment. So they wanted to get the punishment here, right? So the punishment is also in the Jewish law too, as well. But it's only for people who want deliberately to go out in public and do it so they can be seen in public to do it. Because if you keep it private, the government, an Islamic government, can't punish people what they do in their own house. Because your own house is privacy, right? The law of privacy, The Quran says not to spy on people, right? Not to see what they're doing in their house, yeah? And you know the famous, you must know the famous narration where Omar he's a caliph, right? During his time when he was caliph. And he was walking down the street and he heard some noise from someone's house. It sounded a bit weird, so he kind of peeked over the walls. And he saw this man entertaining I think it was a prostitute, and drinking alcohol, right? So to paraphrase, Omar says, like, shame on you, how dare you do this, and this person, you deserve punishment for this. And the man says, no, shame on you for violating my privacy, right? So in essence, what Omar's response to that guy who pointed out that Omar was wrong to violate his privacy was, in essence, words to the effect of, okay, I'll drop it if you drop it, right? Yeah, that the guy didn't get punished because Omar was made a mistake by spying, even though he was breaking the Sharia, and this was the Khalifa, but the Khalifa couldn't punish him, right? But if you want to say, no, I'm not going to just commit adultery, I'm going to go outside in the main football pitch in front of 40,000 people, and I'm going to advertise it to the world what I'm doing. Well, even then you probably won't get punished because you'll be insane. The judge might think you're just crazy, right? Because only a crazy person would think like that. So even in that case, they probably just think you're just nuts, because no one in their sane mind would do that. But theoretically, if they weren't insane, then yeah, sure, that they would be breaking the law and be punishable. But anyway, so I hope that answers your point. The Sharia actually brings justice. I tell you what, that's a long question. I Google my name and type in my name and Sharia next to it. You can find articles by me and lectures by me, and even debates by me with atheists, showing which law system is superior, Western law or Sharia law. And I discuss lectures where I talk about, is Sharia barbaric, and how it can give a superior system for humans that understands human nature.
Is it superior to you, like the Sharia?
The Sharia is superior to any other law system, of course, in terms of its quality, how it addresses human nature. Because the one who showed us Sharia, who revealed it to us, is the same one that created humans in the first place. So who knows best what law works best for humans? The one who made it, or the one who is ignorant of it? The people who made laws out of their own assumptions.
Which Muslim country that goes with the Sharia?
None at the moment. Or thanks to people like the French who came to your country and thought that you needed to be taught how to be civilized, and they made you follow their law systems, and they created an education system which didn't teach you about how the Sharia is superior, which is, and I mean this quite seriously. It's the reason why you don't know about it is because the French were very successful in creating generations of Moroccans which were European in mindset. Yeah, because Europe is the one place that Europe and America doesn't tend to bomb, at least at the moment. All right. So Muslims want to go to the place where they can be sure that the British and the American army won't go and bomb it. So the best place is go to America and Britain, because we're pretty sure that Britain won't bomb Britain and America won't bomb America. So go there to save yourself. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I don't see Muslims leaving Brunei. Or yeah, exactly, and they've recently they said more hudud. They've implemented some hudud laws. No one's leaving it. Why? It's because they've got a good lifestyle. Yeah. So is it Sharia that Muslims are leaving, even though the Sharia is not being applied, or is it poverty and warfare, mostly by invasions from the West, or escaping corrupt governments established by the West after Sykes-Picot? Where do you think they come from, these governments? Yeah. Okay.
Allow me to kind of expand. It's okay.